and the District 9 City Councilor representing Alston-Brighton. Today is Tuesday, April 26th, and as part of our annual budget review, we are having the folks from Boston Public Schools today to give us their overview and of their operating and capital budgets. I'd like to introduce my colleagues in order of their arrival. To my right, the Chairman of Education and my friend from Dorchester. Yes, sir. Yeah, go ahead. Councilor Tito Jackson. To my left, Councilor Matt O'Malley, Councilor Michelle Wu, Councilor Tim McCarthy, and Councilor Josh Zakem. And to my right, just stepped out, is Councilor Frank Baker. I'd like to remind you that this is a public hearing and is being recorded and broadcast on both Comcast Channel 8 and RCN Channel 82. I'd ask everyone in the chamber to silence all of their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation from BPS and questions from the counselors, we will take public testimony, and I would appreciate if anyone who wishes to testify sign up at the sheet to my left by the door entering the chamber. Please state your name and affiliation and residence, and please limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. A new feature of the budget hearings this year is that we will take up to 10 people for online testimony via Google Hangouts at each hearing after in-person testimony. The link to sign up for online testimony is boston.gov/citycouncil/Google ASP. Now I'm going to read the dockets into the record. Today's hearing regarding dockets 0525 through 0527, 0537, and 0543. Orders for the fiscal year 17 operating budget, including annual appropriations and tax order, annual appropriation for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, appropriation for certain park improvements, and appropriation for certain bridge projects. Dockets 0528 through 0532, 0534 through 0536, and 0538 through 0542. Orders for the fiscal year 17 capital budget, including loan orders, appropriations amending previous loan orders, and lease and purchase agreements. And with that, I will turn it over to our friends at the school department. Welcome, Superintendent and your team, and prepare to hear your opening remarks.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. Thank you, Councilor Jackson, and all the other councilors in attendance. This is my first my city council hearing, so I'm very happy and glad to be here. I'm going to make some opening remarks and then introduce our Chief Financial Officer, Eleanor Lawrence. So, Eleanor often says a budget is a reflection of our values, and we've been guided through the budgeting process this year through the values of equity, coherence, and innovation. We started the budgeting process very early on as a new team in Boston Public Schools. We actually started our planning process in October. One of the things we asked every department to do was come to us with your strategic priorities. Come to us with places where you want to make investments, and please come to us with places where there might be opportunities for greater efficiencies. And that process is hugely important because it helped us understand where are the opportunities in each department, where are our strengths, and where were our areas of growth. And it was that initial guidance that helped us really tee up a budgeting process with our schools that got us to a budget where we minimized the cuts that we made to schools and found greater efficiencies in central office. On March 23rd, the school committee did approve a balanced budget that invests in early education, as I said, minimizes cuts to schools, makes some strategic investments in special education, specifically in transition services, inclusive practices, and new data systems. And we put some strategic investments on hold pending potential future allocations. So work that we are going to do with our rigor for all in 4th through 6th grade, some investments we want making for English language learners, those are on hold for now. We also learned as a new team that we could not go through budgeting processes year in and year out without a long-term financial plan. So as part of the first 100 days, we created a long-term financial planning team, cross-functional group. It has representation from the teacher unions, this school committee from City Hall, and our goal is to create a long-term financial plan for BPS, a 3 to 5 year financial plan that aligns with our strategic plan. So very excited about continuing to work on our long-term financial plan moving forward. We're going to be working with the City Hall, electeds, moving forward to make sure we are closing achievement gaps in the city. We begin building new schools, which the city desperately needs, to find ways for more efficiency so we can add more programming into our schools and guaranteeing that all young people in this city are prepared for college, career, and life. And so with that, I'm going to turn it to Ellen Lawrence, who is going to walk through this deck about our BPS budget.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. First, I want to note we'll be in front of you a number of times in the coming weeks. We, in general, are going to err on the side of keeping our presentations brief. Today, to start us off, I wanted to give you a broad and holistic view of the BPS budget. So myself and Carlton will be giving presentations. They'll be a little longer in length, and I just wanted you to be aware that will not be our norm for the remainder of the sessions, so no need to worry. Today there are a number of items I want to touch on. First,
Want to introduce yourself?
oh, sorry. My name is Eleanor Lawrence. My official title is the Executive Director of School Finance at BPS. I'm joined today by our deputy, Nate Cooter, and Carlton Jones. Carlton, what's your official title?
Executive Director of Capital and Facilities Management. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to provide an overview of the operating budget, and I'll touch a little bit on the historic context of the BPS budget, an overview of FY17. I'll highlight some of the investments and reductions that are part of our proposed budget, and comment a bit on our long-term planning, as Dr. Chang referenced. As context, BPS continues to celebrate and benefit from a really, truly incredible commitment to public education in the city of Boston. As many of you have heard stated, the census issued a report last year that looked at the per pupil spending in the 100 largest districts, and we proudly came out on top. And that has been maintained despite declining federal and net state aid for BPS. The city of Boston has helped make up the difference. However, you've also probably heard myself and others talk about the structural budget deficit that we face, which means that our costs, quite simply, are going up on an annual basis more quickly than our revenues. And so that means when we enter our annual budget cycle, we are often forced to make trade-offs and identify savings in order to reach balance and invest in our priorities. Very briefly, an overview of the city of Boston's spending on education. It has grown by 6% a year over the last 5 years when you consider both BPS and charter funding together. And even more striking, when you think about the amount of that bill that the city of Boston itself is footing, when you net out the effect of state aid, the amount that Boston spends on education has been rising by 7.6% a year over this time period. So where do we spend our money in BPS? give you a brief overview of that so you feel grounded in this conversation and others. We think of our budget in 5 broad categories. By far the largest are school budgets, which account for 53% of BPS overall. The vast majority of these dollars are distributed through something we call weighted student funding, or WSF. This is a formula that we are very proud of. We'll talk to you more about it in our next hearing. It is a way to transparently and equitably have dollars and resources follow students to the schools they attend. This 53% figure doesn't include benefits, which we pay for out of central department budget. When you include that on top, nearly 2/3 of our resources are directly tied to an individual school budget. Beyond that, we spend 17% of our budget on what we call school services budgeted essentially. These are things that you would see as you walk around a school building, but don't sit on a school budget. Those are things like facilities, some of our special education services outside of our core classroom teachers. And then, of course, we have transportation and our central office. How have these spending patterns changed over time? You can see that we have increased our spending on average by 3.1% a year over the last 6 years, which means that we've added $162 million to the BPS budget. I'm comparing FY11 to FY16. So where has that extra $162 million gone? You can see it here on page 7. And there are 3 major themes to take away from this of things that are driving up costs. The first is transportation. We spend a lot in transportation, and that number has been growing. You'll see that there was a particularly large jump between 13 and 14. This was part of our renegotiation of our contract. And the other place that you'll notice big jumps are on our school budgets and our school services budget essentially. And there are 2 reasons why our spending there has gone up. One is that our collective, under the agreements of our collective bargaining, our salaries have gone up. And in addition, some of our compliance requirements as we serve our high needs student populations, our English language learners, and our students in special education have also gone up. Those costs are reflected in those categories, schools and school services budget essentially. I also do want to recognize the hard work of colleagues and predecessors. I wish I could claim credit for it, but I can't. The central office has remained relatively flat, and benefits growth, an issue that has plagued other organizations and governments around the country. We have been really lucky in Boston to contain costs in benefits, and we have our colleagues at the city to thank for that. We have, of course, been talking about reductions to the BPS budget for quite a few years. And I wanted to highlight on the next slide where those reductions have come from in the last 2 budget cycles. You can see a variety of categories of reductions from in FY15 and 16. I just want to highlight that bright yellow sliver in 16, school budgets. We have been successful in our aim to protect school budgets whenever possible. And so as looking across these 2 years, you'll see that we have been we've almost entirely been able to protect school budgets. I'll turn now to an overview of FY17. Dr. Chang started off by saying that our budget is a reflection of our values. And so when we find ourselves steeped in numbers and having to make difficult trade-offs, we always keep front and center our values. And I did want to take a moment here and read the 5 value statements that have been part of Dr. Chang's 100-day plan document that some of you may have seen. The first is that all youth can and must achieve at high levels. Second, that we innovate and transform teaching and learning to inspire excellence. Third, that those closest to students must be empowered and held accountable for making the most critical decisions that lead to student achievement. Fourth, that every child should have access to a high-quality school of their choice close to home. And fifth, that we must build a culture of we that is embraced by students, staff, families, and communities. That is what motivated us, the values that we held front and center as we made decisions and trade-offs this year. So turning to an overview of FY17. Overall, our costs at BPS, if we did nothing, are rising by $38 million from FY16 to 17. We have already begun taking steps to achieve some efficiencies, primarily in the area of transportation. We think we owe it to the taxpayers of Boston, to the students of BPS, to not just keep doing next year what we did last year. So $8 million of savings are already in progress. We have a number of investments to honor past commitments and support core operations, which total $3 million. And we've also proposed $5 million of strategic investments. As Dr. Chang noted, we do have some additional critical investments that we would like to make, which are contingent on additional state funding. The $13.5 million in additional appropriations from the city would help pay for these expenses. We do need to recognize that we also must make up the difference for declining federal and net state aid. But in order to fully fund our investments and reach a balanced budget in FY17, we need to make approximately $31 million in reductions. That figure includes the $8 million of efficiencies that are already in process. So those reductions not only help us address our structural deficit and present to you today a balanced budget, they also allow us to pay for critical investments that Dr. Chang highlighted, such as the expansion of early childhood and some of the supports for special education. I am proud to say that we've been able to continue our tradition of protecting school budgets. The vast majority of the cuts, 26 million out of the 31, are being shouldered by central departments. I want to take a moment and explain some of the changes that happened between this budget, which you see in front of you today, which was approved by the school committee, and the original budget, which we proposed to the school committee on February 3rd. It's certainly been in the headlines, and you may have had constituents asking you questions. So just to clarify, in case that has created any confusion. Our original proposal at the start of our public process with the school committee included a total of $11 million in strategic investments. In order to fully fund those investments, our original proposal included reductions of $38 million, a figure you'll notice is higher than the figure $31 million that I just noted. The changes to school budgets included $7 million in reductions to our high school weights in our school funding formula. So what changed? Between our original proposal to the school committee on February 3rd and the budget that was ultimately passed, in which we present to you today, we made 3 changes. Number 1, we restored the reductions in high school weights. Number 2, we protected our special education and K-1 investments. And number 3, we made every other strategic investment contingent on additional revenue, which we hope to see from the state in the form of charter reimbursement. We remain highly committed to those original proposed investments, but we felt like it was a calculated risk that was worth taking. We continue to be cautiously optimistic about the state funding, but if we find out in June that we get more money from the state, it's very hard for our schools to spend that money well in June. We'd rather take the risk on the central departments. I will briefly run through some of the highlights of the proposed investments and reductions. I will note, of course, that in future hearings, we're going to have teams present that are more expert on some of the individual aspects of this, and we'll go into it in more detail. Early education. We share here on page 15 some of the highlights of research on the positive effects of K-1 on grade 3 MCAS math scores. Across the country and in Boston specifically, research has proven the benefits of early education in helping to close the achievement gap. We remain committed to expanding the number of K-1 seats we can offer and are very proud that our budget includes over 200 new K-1 seats. This is tied to a $3 million investment. You can see here on page 16 some of the detail of where that $3 million goes. We are also pleased to be making an investment in special education support teams. These are teams of teachers and staff who will be working directly in schools with teachers and principals on how we serve our most vulnerable students. Excuse me. We are optimistic that this investment will help us move our system towards our long-term vision of how we want to serve our special education students. Specifically, focusing on moving students to the least restrictive environment and seeing outcomes for our special education students in line with what we hope for them. Extended learning time has also been a high priority for the school system in recent years. We remain very committed to the full rollout of extended learning time, but we are delaying the implementation of Cohort 2. Our original agreement with the BTU had included rolling out ELT over 3 years. We remain committed to that timeline, but we are going to add more schools in the 3rd year rather than the 2nd year. The reason for that, quite frankly, is that we want to make sure that we are learning as much as we can from the schools that have been going through the process in the 1st year, so that our rollout of all the other schools in the 3rd year is as successful as possible. We also have some complicated logistics to navigate when it comes to transportation. Our transportation costs remain in balance by having equal distribution of school start times across our tiers, and fiddling with the length of the school day affects our ability to be as efficient as possible with transportation dollars. We are also maintaining commitments that have been made to schools that are in the middle of changing their configuration. So imagine a school that had wanted to go from being a K-5 and to being a K-8 that was approved by the school committee in a previous year. It costs us some money to add an 8th grade. They're adding a grade at a time. So you'll see in our proposal $700,000 for 33 new classrooms. These are all decisions that have been made in previous years that we are honoring. I'll touch now on a few of the reductions that are part of our proposal. I've alluded to this already, but when we sit down to make these kinds of trade-offs for the Boston Public Schools, always we look first to control costs centrally and in operations, and you'll see that reflected in our budget this year. We have proposed a very aggressive change in our transportation budget, a cut of $10 million versus their projected expenses for the current fiscal year. The next time we sit in front of you, we'll be going into detail on school budgets. I will say briefly now, that we have increased our base funding by approximately $10 million on our school budgets, which supports higher salaries. We have made a reduction in special education staffing assumptions. These are adjustments to the assumptions underlying the funding of special education students. Some classrooms that serve autistic and EI students across BPS next year could have one additional student in the classroom as a result. I will make some important notes here. I believe Katie Hammer said this yesterday when she was in front of you, but we do not currently have a collective bargaining agreement in place with the BTU or other bargaining units. When those agreements are in place, our appropriation is likely to rise, which would reflect even greater increases to our school budgets to reflect higher salaries. I do also want to note, in reference to special education, our overall spending on special education continues to rise despite this change to the assumed staffing. It will be going up by $9 million, a reflection of both rising salaries and staffing changes. Individual school budgets can shift for a number of reasons. Because we have a choice system in Boston paired with our weighted student funding formula, we've created a system where some schools are growing and others are declining. And it is one of the values in how we allocate money that we do believe that dollars should follow students. And so when schools are experiencing shifts in enrollment, that does affect their budget. In addition, some of our autonomous schools have elected to exercise their choice to budget on actual versus average salaries. I know that sounds a bit technical, but it has made a difference for some schools. In some years, it works in their favor. They get to get charged the actual dollars for their teaching staff. But for many of them, as they mature as a school and their teachers move up the salary schedule, it does exert a pressure on their budget. So I wanted to explain these two other elements, that individual schools could be experiencing bigger shifts than is reflected in the headline numbers that I shared. This doesn't minimize what it feels like to be a school going through those shifts. We partner with them to offer whatever supports we can. I referenced briefly the proposed cut to transportation. There's an important thing for you to take away on the issue of transportation. Our focus is on improved efficiency of operations. This cut reflects no changes to the policies of service. This does not affect what students will get transported where. On page 24, you can see some of the efficiencies that the team is pursuing, both in the category of operations optimization as well as routing. We will have a hearing where we can talk about some of these issues in more detail as well. A number of years ago, we rolled out what we call our early hiring initiative. We've been really excited and pleased to see the results of this initiative. Providing our students with excellent and diverse teachers is one of the most significant ways that we can increase student achievement. And that's why we remain committed to our early hiring initiative, and that's been reflected in this budget. And as in previous years, this spring, we were able to open post positions on March 1st. Doing so puts BPS on equal footing with charters and neighboring districts to compete for the best talent. The teachers who are looking for jobs in the late winter, early spring, and early summer. After 2 years of early hiring in BPS, we've developed effective ways to ensure that our strong permanent BPS teachers who are excess from their positions are interviewed and hired at other BPS schools. This includes both the support and preparation we provide teachers, as well as the customized information we provide to principals about candidate strengths and qualifications. Our team, our human capital team, is working very hard this year to maintain all that is great about the mutual consent and early hiring process, while keeping an eye on costs. We are optimistic that we will be able to contain the costs by keeping the size of the excess pool smaller by the end of the hiring season. Boston has 5 early education centers and early learning centers. These schools receive a supplement on top of what they get through weighted student funding, and it is a not insignificant supplement. They are receiving between $4,700 and $9,300 per pupil more than our traditional schools serving the same grades. You can see some of the details here on page 26 of the supplement these locations receive beyond WSF. We have worked very closely with our EECs and ELCs this year to reduce the overall supplement. It's currently at $4.2 million. We're reducing that by approximately $900,000. So all 5 locations will continue to receive a supplement. The hours at those locations haven't changed, but we have made a reduction to the supplement of what they get on top of WSF. While no change is easy, we do feel like making this change is part of what helps us expand the core academic offering of K-1 to more students next year. Lastly, I'll touch on the subject of partnerships. In FY16, the school department had $8 million of funds that were allocated to partner organizations. You can see all the detail here on page 27. We are proud to have such a wealth of high-quality partner organizations who support our schools with learning opportunities. Given the trade-offs we were forced to make for this year, we worked very closely with those partner organizations in our schools to see if there are places that we could make adjustments. You'll see the proposed FY17 amount for every partner organization here, and that is a 21% reduction in our overall partnership funding. Before I conclude, I want to reflect a little bit on the future of BPS's financial situation. Throughout this budget season, we've heard a lot of the concerns that have been raised. We're going through this conversation year after year about needing to make reductions. How do we get off this treadmill? We are working very hard to come up with good answers to that. As Dr. Chang mentioned, we've put together a work group. We're meeting monthly with a number of representatives from key stakeholders. And we're investing in analysis to make sure we have an in-depth understanding of the problem. Four very clear themes have emerged every time we look at our budget or an external organization looks at our budget. There are different ways of saying it, but I've represented it here, these four themes. One is the size of the BPS footprint. That includes the number of schools, the number of classrooms, the number of programs that we offer relative to student demand, which affects both school administrative costs and classroom utilization. The second is our special education budget, which is driven both by identification, service models, and transportation. Third is transportation itself. Of course, BPS spends a lot on transportation relative to peer districts. It is core to our effort to have more equity in access to seats across the city. And then lastly, are components of our collective bargaining contracts, which I would say are both in terms of the pay structure and also in terms of the other terms that govern how we work with our staff. All four of these themes are things that we are working on diligently to come up with bold, long-term solutions that we can have dynamic, open, public conversations about so that we make these choices explicit and we understand the price tag associated with some of these issues. And if we continue with them, we do so knowingly and willingly. One of the issues that I mentioned was the BPS footprint. I know how sensitive this issue can be, and I want to assure this body and our public that our review of the facilities and footprint will be driven by data and include deep dialogue with our community. We are in the process of collecting data, which we will publish and share with our community. We will engage in public dialogue, and we will develop proposals and review them with our school committee. As we move forward in coming up with the long-term solutions to our fiscal situation, we are committed to working with our advisory council to develop proposals, continuing to collect and publish data, and engaging with our community for dialogue and decision-making this spring and summer. Excuse me. With that, I'm going to conclude my remarks on the operating budget and turn it over to Carlton to speak about capital.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and fellow counselors. Again, Carlton Jones, Executive Director of Capitals and Facility Management, and I just wish to go over 6 brief slides just to give you an overview of the capital budget and plan, and then we can proceed with your questions. First, I want to begin with our FY17 capital spending and authorization request that would support that spending, an overview of projects by neighborhood, and then an update on our 10-year educational and facilities master plan. So for FY17, we anticipate spending $65.1 million. That $65.1 million is supported by $43.6 million in capital authorization, as well as grants in the form of Massachusetts School Building Authority funds and also surplus property funds that would total $21.5 million. We're seeking new authorization of 29.1, which we're hoping that you would vote favorably on. This authorization is to support our Windows projects primarily. We have an $8.8 million request to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And just to remind you, we're partnering with them. They fund approximately half. It depends on the rate at the time. But we're going to say, just for round numbers, it's about 50% of the funding comes from the state, and the other 50% comes from city capital. So that would be $8.8 million. $6 million technology infrastructure funding to support our efforts to continue rolling out technology through our schools. There's $4.2 million for the Elliott School, 585 Commercial Street. We also have 2 other projects going on for the Elliott School. And then also the access improvements are continuing at the Henderson Innovation School. This is the phase 2 of that project. On slide 4, this is an overview of projects that are underway by neighborhood. It's just to give you a flavor of where we are and how we are ensuring that we are taking care of our capital assets, but also being mindful of the city in its entirety. So you can see here a representation. The full calling out and explanation of the projects are in the city capital's budget document that is posted on the web that you probably also have. So you can get the detail on those actual projects. And now I move on to the 10-year educational and facilities master plan. And we oftentimes call it the FMP internally, the facilities master plan, but as Dr. Chang has pointed out, it's more than just a facility plan, it's an educational plan, and this is where we see the future BPS coming from. On slide 5, you'll see an organizational chart which shows how the superintendent's team is leading this effort. There's several of us that are on the team that are constantly meeting with the organizations that make up the consultancy for this effort. This effort is broken up into 5 major areas, as you can see, beginning with demographics, and I move across the page, educational planning, facilities assessment, finance, and community engagement. And actually, if we were to redraw this, community engagement really is the overreaching across all of the other 4 areas. The demographics team has come through, grabbed data from the Boston Redevelopment Authority and from us, and have actually are preparing projections out for 10 years to show what our population would look like and what is Boston Public Schools' share anticipated to be relative to that population. The educational planning team is looking at not just recreating education as it has been over time, but actually looking at universal design and other innovative ways to ensure that what we are projecting forward is actually conducive to modern thinking and the 3 tenets that Superintendent Chang has given us. He's making sure that we are looking at this and develop a plan that has coherence, innovation, and, holy cow, I just thought, equity. Thank you. I don't know why. Yes. I've been saying that all the time, and now the most important time, I forget it. All right, here we go. So innovation, equity, and coherence to make sure that this permeates throughout the entire effort. We're in the middle of our facilities assessment right now. Over the summer, we had created a pilot study of 3 schools, moved into 19 schools in the winter where it was a deeper dive based on the pilot. And now we're going through the rest of the 111 schools to ensure that every school gets a visit, every school gets an educational view as well as the facility view. The nice thing about the 19 schools that were done over the winter was that they were representative of our school stock by era and by school type. So we can make inferences from that work as we go through the 111. The finance team has a charge to figure out not only what this plan should look like over time, but creative ways that we can finance it. We know that if we need to get all this work done, as Mayor Walsh has spoken of the $1 billion plan over 10 years, we need to have a way of ensuring that that actually does happen. The result would not be, it has to be financeable, it has to be affordable. So we need to make sure that that team is working on that. And then I mentioned community engagement to ensure that all of our stakeholders, students, parents, community members, everyone in Boston has a stake in our plan. And so we need to make sure that we're reaching out to them using various means and all the means that we have at our disposal. And then lastly, the last slide is just to remind you, you've actually seen this one before, but in case, well, some of you have seen this before, some of you are new, to make sure that you understand entirely what we're doing in terms of the master plan, that we're looking at the educational requirements, as I had mentioned, the enrollment requirements, coupled with the facility side. So that all makes up phase one. And then phase two is where the plan, the actual plan forward is put together so that we can say over the next 10 years, this is what Boston Public Schools should do to ensure that our building stock not only can accommodate the students that we have, but accommodates them using 21st century learning methodologies. And so that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Let me recognize several of our colleagues who've arrived. Counselor Andrea Campbell, Counselor Sal Martina to my left, Counselor Ayanna Presley, who just stepped out, and Counselor Anissa Sabi George. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to start off where you ended, Carlton, on the facilities master plan. So could you give us a timeline, times of year, where we are in the phases here and where we expect to be at the end of this school year and so forth?
Right. So this was actually designed to be an 18-month study, and we're a little more than halfway through. So we are right in the midst of the plan. We're targeting winter of this winter to actually have the plan conclude. A lot of the information is coming together, and I didn't mention that a lot of it's also on our web. We have a website, Boston Public Schools /Build Boston, where as information is produced and presented, we're actually putting it on the web for all to see. So we're right in the middle. The thing that we're working on the most is the facility study, because that's the most onerous. That's where we're trying to get to every school in the time frame. We will have visited every school by the end of school year. So by the end of June, we anticipate having concluded that portion of the study. There's going to be a large effort this summer that Superintendent Chang will have, where folks will actually be able to contribute to the thinking behind what comes next. Information is going to be presented out to the community in various forms, and it will allow members in the community to actually say, what do they think about some of the efforts that we are working on. I'm trying not to use specifics just because I don't want to preview what's happening, but
Right.
that's what we anticipate.
Do you think you'll have some recommendations by, let's say, the summer of 2017?
Absolutely, right. So
Okay.
by summer of 2017, we will have actually received the report, and then internally we will take the report and say, now what do we do with it next? I mean, that's the next step, to say, how do we internalize, how do we operationalize, where do we go from here? So by the summer of 2017, I fully anticipate we should be in a position to have recommendations before the school committee.
And then, so that will be school year 17, 18. So really, we really can't imagine doing anything until the school year 18, 19.
That's reasonable to say. I mean, there's certain things that we might be able to do ahead of time, depending on the nature and the scope of what that is. The goal is to ensure that we are moving forward with our 10-year long-range plan, but in the short term, we still know that we have short-term needs that we need to address. And so we want to make sure that we are informing our near-term decisions based on the long-range vision.
I'm just going to shift gears to personnel. There's been an increase of 64 FTEs to the school department. Can someone walk me through where those personnel FTEs are going to, and
You're looking at the city's budget book, the projected filled FTEs for FY17.
correct, yeah.
I'll need a moment just to pull up the FTE data. Do you
Sure.
want to ask another question and then I can come back to that?
Okay, actually, well, while you're looking at that, I just want to remind folks, so we're going to have our first round of questions. I'm going to try to keep you guys to 5 minutes because of all the counselors here, and I have my little stopwatch, so just check in with me occasionally. Didn't have another question, actually. I guess I want to congratulate you on the trauma grant today.
Thank you.
And have full implementation probably next year, or?
We're actually already beginning. Oh, sorry. Actually, Councilor Presley was at attendance yesterday. It was a great day yesterday. We were able to announce the grant. It's with it's our MOVA grant, and it's going to be our opportunity to work with young people and their families and adults that work in our schools to not only be able to assess for issues of trauma, but to actually be able to address it. We're going to focus in on 10 of our particular schools that with data that shows that kids are showing symptoms of exposure to most trauma, and 500 families we're going to be really focused on directly. But I know Councilor Presley has been a huge advocate for this
She
issue.
has been a huge advocate for trauma, as well as Anise Sabi-George just recently joined our council, and Councilor Andrea Campbell and Tito Jackson here. I will pass my next question on, and you don't mind if he cuts in just to run through the 64. So let me recognize Councilor Jackson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess we'll start with Carlton. So Carlton, the issue. I'm sorry, Superintendent. Thank you for being here. You have a 17F before you that is for the McKinsey report. You spent $660,000 on a report. I'm a little confused on the spend because you're doing a facilities plan currently. So there's a request from the City Council through the Mayor's office to have that report, which we only have 30 slides of, made available to the City Council. Many times it has been brought up at school committee meetings. The mayor has actually quoted data out of that report, and we don't have the report. So it is my expectation that the council deserves to have that report. So I'd like to know the status of that report being sent to the Boston City Council.
Okay.
I believe that the mayor's office has been handling the request. I apologize, I don't have details of our response.
Okay, so I would just simply say $660,000 is a whole lot of money, and it could have been used to actually be given to students. It could have the Diploma Plus program, which you got grant funding for about $500,000. That could have been paid for by that. I guess the first
Councilor
area.
Jackson, really
Yes.
quickly, you're referring to the McKinsey audit report that the mayor commissioned when he began his tenure as the mayor of Boston, right?
I know it by $660,000. So I don't. The time frame piece is the issue. It hasn't been shared with the public. It has been quoted several times, and I think misquoted. There are not 93,000 seats in the Boston Public Schools. In fact, data from your department a couple years ago says that there were 61,338 seats. And there are 4,934 seats that were open, and we're about at 92% capacity. And so, and in that time, there have been schools that are closed. In addition, your most recent data actually shows that you're going to actually grow from what I'm hearing from the comprehensive facilities plan. But I guess I'd like to know, do charters call on our local tax dollars at a faster rate than BPS? When you have your graph up there, What are we? Are they growing faster than our schools are growing?
So my understanding of the way the state law works, and I'm not the best expert on this, but I'll try to explain it, is that the state dictates that we spend the same amount per pupil at BPS that as we do in our charter schools. And so that affects our charter allocations, because what we spend at BPS affects the above foundation per pupil amount that goes to transfer to charters. Because the number of seats is growing quickly in our charter schools, if you looked just at the bucket of money that was going to charters, yes, that would be growing at a faster rate, but on a per pupil basis, it is the same. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So how much? How much would we have in addition to your current budget if the Commonwealth charters were, say, funded by a state line item versus coming off as an assessment?
It's a good question. I'm afraid I don't have an answer to it yet. It's a little complicated because it doesn't actually come out of our budget. It comes out of the city budget.
So how much did you get in Chapter 70 funding last year?
None of the state, the Chapter 70 dollars don't come directly to BPS. They come to the city of Boston and then are become part of our general fund
So
appropriation.
the issue I have, though, is that I had the city before us yesterday, and they're saying that you're going to answer these questions, and you're saying that they're going to answer the questions. So how much how much are you intending this year to have to? It's 5% of your
Yeah.
budget. What dollar amount are charters going to cost in the budget that you're putting forward?
I'm not trying to be evasive, but I don't. It doesn't come out of the BPS budget, so I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that question.
But this is unacceptable because yesterday we had the city before us. They told you that you would answer education funding questions, and now you're saying that you can't answer education questions.
Counselor, I'm going to pull this information from a deck from the breakfast presentation.
Okay.
The Boston Public Schools for fiscal year 17 represents 35% of the city's $2.97 billion budget. The charter school assessment is anticipated at 5%, so a total of 40% of the city's budget being spent on education.
Okay, guys. So I don't know how we play this game, Mr. Chair. We have to have a number. This is a budget conversation. This is not a policy conversation. We need a number, and you can get it to us another time. But I don't understand. We're having a conversation about $1 billion budget. You're telling us it's 5%, and you can't answer for me what the charter assessment is going to be. I'll move on to the next question.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We'd be happy to, as you suggest, come back with more answers at our next hearing.
Okay. So can you explain how the process works? I think it's improper for us to continue to state that, hey, the budget's going to go up, so we're going to keep it's okay now because we're going to negotiate with the teachers. First off, your last contract took 2.5 years to be negotiated. Can you explain how collective bargaining works and how the reserve fund works relative to the collective bargaining process? And how the city and or the school department puts money away in terms of their anticipated spend, and how that is either reflected or not reflected in the budget.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. The easiest way might be to give an example of the recent driver's contract negotiation that took place. After an agreement was reached, we present the new proposal to the school committee. They approve the request, and a request for a supplemental allocation is submitted to the city, and I believe it gets city council approval. So the historic incremental amounts that are part of the contract for our drivers, for instance, are covered in their entirety for the historic looking piece by a supplemental allocation. I'm afraid I couldn't speak to how the reserves work at the city, since that doesn't fall in the BPS books, but we would use the same approach for the BTU or other collective bargaining units.
So it's improper, it would be improper to say that this budget doesn't, is in some way going to get trued up or amended in your actual operating, that will come from a reserve.
Sorry, could you state the question once
What
more?
I'm saying is, what I've heard people say, and this has happened at school committee,
Yeah.
is that, well, this 1.027 million doesn't reflect the step raises that are going to
Yep.
be there. So, hey, you know, it'll go up later. That's actually not the case because you don't have a current contract in front of you. Money is put aside in a fund, and that money would be drawn down. It would not actually be added to the operating budget.
Did you
Can you explain? Because
I think I think it's a fair characterization. The amount of money that we're going to spend to operate our schools in FY17 is very likely, extremely likely, to be more than 1.027 billion. Right now, we have an assumption of a 0% wage change for our staff in collective bargaining units for the BTU.
And I'll ask one more this round, Mr. Chair. So the graph that you did on the general fund support for all education, can you disaggregate that graph? What portion of the 6% increase is BPS? What portion is charter?
Yeah. You know what? Rather than suppose and try to estimate, can I come back to you with the precise answer at our next hearing?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to request, if we're going to have a conversation about a budget overview, we actually need to be able to have all of the data before us, and we can't play back and forth with the administration. This is education funding and dollars that are being assessed based on Chapter 70 funding, and it does go to BPS. Because we can't, it goes through the city, but it goes through BPS. So I think we need to make sure that you have your stuff in line relative to where you're getting your dollars. And then again, I'm going to ask you, the 7.6% increase, does that include charters? And what amount of that is charters? And before I hand it back, it upsets me that you guys, in your slides, over the same time, other city departments saw a 2.5% average annual growth. I just think you should be proud of the spend that we should actually have, and that we should not argue against ourselves relative to the commitment that we have to the young people in the city of Boston. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back around. I have several more questions for the next round, but I would hope that the administration, as well as the school department, comes prepared to answer questions. We are all assembled to deal with these issues, but if we can't deal with the issues in particular of charter at a time when legislation is pending at the State House, and these things are hanging over our head, then we can't move forward intelligibly. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. So we do request that information as soon as possible to be distributed to all members, please. Do you have the answer to the
Yes.
personnel question?
In terms of projected filled FTEs, we're seeing increases in two main categories. The first is in teachers. We're projecting an additional 32 teachers, mostly for English language learners and special education. The other category is in professional support. And so these are the additional FTEs that we typically see to support our additional programs. The overall, when we typically think about our budget, it's a little bit different than when we go to the school committee, we're often talking about our budgeted FTEs. And so we're actually anticipating a higher fill rate due to our increasing recruitment efforts more than it is adding additional positions for the next year.
Because when we're adding positions, we're also, paying people that aren't working, right? Do we have a number on that right now? The number of
Suitable professional
staff.
capacity.
Yeah.
This is a question about suitable professional capacity or about long-term leave? In terms of our projection for suitable professional capacity, I don't actually have that number in front of me.
I don't have the number in front of me either, but we will be back here next week to go deep into our Office of Human Capital,
Right.
and we'll have that data then.
Is it about a $6 million value? Does that sound about
The amount
right?
of money that we spend on suitable professional capacity,
right.
the total amount, including benefits, is 13.3 million.
Okay,
And the number of teachers who are in that category fluctuates over the course of the year. It starts off higher and then declines over time, which is why it's hard to give one
right,
figure at a point in time.
right. Usually we'll have just a snapshot and we understand it's a, fluid situation. Let me recognize Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Chair of the Education Committee as well for his questions. So there seems to be a disconnect in the conversations around the education budget this year. It seems as though principals, as they're putting their budgets together, seem to have been told that to do more with less. That's making its way to the school side councils, which is making its way for us. But what I'm hearing today is that things are actually a lot rosier than was originally said or originally projected. Is that accurate?
Well, some of that sentiment you may have heard prior to the changes in our budget in mid to late March.
Okay.
And so, as I mentioned, our original proposal to the school committee on February 3rd and the budgets which were given to schools in December did include a proposed reduction for our high schools in the tune of about $7 million.
Okay.
And so that did put additional pressure on school budgets, which has since been alleviated.
So, and this, I think, is the crux of it. So just very briefly, because I want to be cognizant of my colleagues' time. So in December, a principal is charged with putting together a budget for his or her school. And the guidelines are set forth by, I still say Court Street, but the bowling building, central administration. And he or she will put that budget together and then submit it back to central administration, and that'll be part of the portfolio that'll go before the school committee, and then us, and then ultimately, if passed, signed into law. So with the high schools, originally in the February budget, there was a $38 million budget shortfall. Is that correct?
Say that again. And there was
In the February 2nd budget, the budget deficit was $38 million.
not quite. We had $38 million of proposed reductions,
Okay.
which was the figure was higher in order to pay for proposed investments, which at that point totaled $14 million.
Okay, and now that $38 million proposed reductions became $31 million proposed reductions, and the $7 million was then put back in to restore the high schools. They were
Yes.
facing cuts. So are all high schools now level funded or at appropriate levels, cognizant of increase in salaries as they were last year?
So I think it's important to understand when we originally proposed cuts to school, they came in two buckets. One was a $7 million cut at the high school level.
Mm-hmm.
There was $5 million in special education weights that affected all schools. We restored the $7 million to high schools, but the $5 million cut to increase class size for particular classrooms in special education, that affected all schools. So our high schools are also experiencing some level of weight cut.
Okay. But less than originally proposed.
Much less.
So I know BCLA was very active. Boston Latin School, my alma mater, was very active. So many high schools were looking at $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 cuts. What is the average cut for those high schools now? Admittedly, it's a case-by-case basis, but what's the difference? And I'm not trying to throw tough questions. I'm
Right.
trying to wrap my head around this because it's confusing.
The differences are the cuts are going to depend on many factors for the schools. It will depend on the number of students they have of special needs. It can be number of English language learners they're serving, their enrollment projection changes. So there's many factors that affect a school's budget. Some of our schools didn't receive any cuts. Some of our schools got additional funding.
Okay.
Some of our schools did receive significant cuts.
But again, with the changing to the the SPED staffing levels that's going to affect, and ELL staffing levels that's going to affect some of these high schools. And I would argue that these are the high schools that are no high schools equipped to handle a cut, but these particularly serve more vulnerable populations. Explain to me how, on one of the slides, it says special education staffing has gone up $9 million, but staffing assumptions decreased by $5 million. Does that mean there was a $14 million investment, or now there's a $4 million increase? I just don't understand what that means.
I can,
The $9 million is the overall amount that we're budgeted to spend next year on special education. A lot of that has to do with expansions of inclusion classrooms and the increasing costs of existing staff. The $5 million reduction is the reduction in weights for particular categories of students within the weighted student funding model. So the $9 million is after the reduction in weight.
Okay. And let me just say, I am a huge proponent of the inclusion model. It is done to extreme success at the Manning School, to name one, but do obviously have some concerns about, I mean, and you know this, I'm preaching to the converted here, but particularly when we look at our autism population, there are very different needs and classifications and where a kid could fall on the spectrum, so I'm concerned about that. Actual versus average salaries. So explain to me why do we give that option for a principal crafting his or her budget when it seems like we're going to set ourselves up for more confusion down the line?
it's a very fair question. It is frankly a legacy of a system that has many different school models, and many of our schools that fall into the category that we call autonomous, whether that's Horace Mann or Pilot or Innovation or in-district charter, have specific MOUs that give them different autonomies than our traditional BPS schools. And so we have some budgetary policies that affect that category of autonomous schools differently. And
But what would happen, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just,
Yeah.
my only 5 minutes, what would happen if I'm the principal of Jane Doe Elementary and I use the average salaries, but my staff comes in at significantly higher, it's an older, more experienced staff? Do I then lose positions or lose?
school, go ahead,
You
Nate.
said at an average salary school?
Yes.
At an average salary school, the actual salaries of the employees does not affect your budget. You budget the same amount for every single position, regardless of how much your teachers make. At the actual salary schools, those are the schools where they budget for what that person makes, and they may, from year to year, feel either cuts or benefits depending on whether they're retaining staff or recruiting new staff.
But doesn't it make it more difficult for you guys to do your job when there could be overages that add up into hundreds of thousands of dollars?
May I make a
Go
quick comment on that? And I'm going to provide some like a national
please. Sure.
national context on this. So I previously came from a school district that was massive, 650,000 kids, and what we use mainly average salaries. What you saw over time was that schools in neighborhoods, more suburban neighborhoods, where the environment may be more favorable, teachers, more experienced teachers tended to go to those schools. And what you would see younger teachers in more less favorable,
Sure.
quote unquote, less favorable situations.
Completely understandable.
And when you look at average, if you took real salaries, you will see a massive equity issue.
Yeah.
And so what BPS should be really proud of, and BPS is a national leader on this, is the dollars follow the kids. So through the weighted student formula, dollars go to the kids based on particular demographic metrics. And it's something we're actually going to revisit. We're going to revisit student weighted formula because I think we could still do some improvement on it. But these schools that use real salaries, they're using those real salaries to give us a more transparent sense of where are the dollars actually
Super.
going.
I'm with you. I
Yeah.
think every school should use actual salaries, and I think that would help central office get a better handle of where changes need to be made.
Great.
ELCs have heard the West Zone ELC is in my district. They're looking at a $500,000 or close to it cut. Did that happen as a result of finding funds to restore the $7 million to high schools?
So our investment, we wanted to make sure we made an investment into early education and we are able to provide over 200 additional seats. The reason why we decided to take a look at EECs and ELCs, there are 5 of these citywide. They serve 1,092 students. There are some EECs which get an additional funding of up to 4,700. What?
Up to 9,000.
Oh, yeah, right. Up to $9,000 per child. And there are some
And that's
other
on top of the
weighted student formula.
15,000?
Yes.
That's on top of,
Yes.
Okay.
And there are some EECs, for example, the East Boston EEC, which receives only $4,300 in addition.
Yeah.
So what we hope to do is actually bring a little bit more equity to it. Still maintaining programs, still making sure that kids are there till 6 p.m., and in addition, adding more early education seats throughout the city.
so this just means essentially that the class size will get bigger to accommodate these ELCs?
It's going to depend on the schools, how they decide to use those dollars. It may be programming, it may be staffing per classroom.
Okay.
It's going to depend on the school.
And then my last statement, and I will do more questions for the second round, is I don't know who said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting the different results. It was been misattributed to Einstein and Mark Twain, and this is an indictment against anyone there, but this is my 6th budget, and this is the 6th time I'm going to ask about the facilities plan. This began with Dr. Johnson, and then John McDonough, and now your administration superintendent. My first hearing order in March of 2011 was as a result of the closure of the Agassiz, which then closed, remained mothballed for a year, now houses 2 schools. Carlton, I know you're a good guy, and you've always played it straight with me, and I know you've been working on this, but this is a level of frustration that we hear. We talk to parents who are concerned about changes, who are concerned about cuts, and one of the things we say is we need to wrap our heads around this master facilities plan, and they say you've been saying that for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years now. So I'm glad to see that there seems to be a timeline in place. But again, this is I think led to a lot of sort of cynicism around the debate, this healthy debate about school budgets and making sure that we're able to provide for our kids. So I just appreciate the work that's being done, but we need to have something done, something put in place, something before our parents as soon as humanly possible. We've been waiting far too long for this. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all my colleagues who have spoken already and asked made a lot of the points that I think that I've been hearing from constituents and parents and families. I want to keep it big picture for my 5 minutes because I know there's so many other hearings on specific topics. But I do want to start by reinforcing what Councilor Jackson said about the 17F request and the council's right by charter to request information. So would also like to encourage progress on that. So my set of questions is around schools and the ability for leaders at the level closest to parents, or as you mentioned in the value statements, those closest to students, to be held empowered and accountable for making the most critical decisions. It often feels like the way that the calendar is set up, the timeline that Councilor O'Malley walked us through, just sets up schools for a lot of confusion and adjustments along the way. Is there any thought, especially with the proposal or the initiative for multi-year look-aheads, that will have some resolution and be different? Because I've only been on the council now for my 3rd year, but every year it feels like parents are feeling more desperate because the cuts to schools, again, it's just surprise after surprise, and some things get restored with soft landings later, but the whole calendar seems like it's just set up for stress and anxiety.
Yeah. I'm afraid budgets do create stress and anxiety, and we recognize that. We work very hard to try to minimize it. We have asked some of the same questions this year, and I'll tell you there are lots of statutory requirements that drive our budget timeline. We've thought about even trying to move those, and I'll tell you the one thing we keep coming back to is our early hiring, is that the stake in the ground that we think is the most immovable is March 1st, which is the deadline by which we want to post jobs. And it's because we believe so strongly in the power of hiring the most effective and diverse students hiring the most effective and diverse teachers to be in front of our students. And the research shows that hiring teachers earlier helps us in that effort. So if we want to be posting jobs by March 1st, if we work back from that, it does require that we start engaging with our principals and headmasters, our school site school site councils in the December and January timeline in order to be ready to post by March 1st. So I agree with you. We're looking at it. I think our continued dedication to early hiring would suggest that we're likely to keep it this early in the calendar for that reason. But I want to explain our thinking on it.
So how will that work with multi-year? How will multi-year budgeting make it better? Are you able to realistically project ahead what the state might provide and support over 2-3 years down the line, and then say to schools in December, January, this is what you might have because we budgeted it out last year this time?
The multi-year focus, which is a huge priority for us as well, should help relieve some of the pressure on schools if we can be successful. And the issue is that we need a multi-year time horizon to look at some of the structural issues that I mentioned towards the end of my presentation. It's when we fail to look at those deeper structural issues that the buck gets passed to schools to figure out how to navigate. And if we do our job well in helping them, in helping prepare and set them up, then their budget process should be hopefully less stressful.
So when do you think that the first multi-year budget might be possible?
We plan to begin engaging on that publicly in the summer or early fall.
So for next budget, next year's fiscal budget
Yes.
potentially? Okay. And that would that include then the facility, so the facilities master plan would be looped into that as well, and there would be projections for what may or may not happen with school closures or other changes?
I don't know that we're going to have all of the answers to that by the summer or fall, but we're going to begin having those conversations.
Okay. I'll save the rest for later rounds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Dr. Chang, and Eleanor. Thanks for hanging in there. I know you're sick as a dog, so I appreciate your
Thank you.
your efforts. I know this is a 3,000-foot view, so I'm not going to get into too many specifics. This is my third BPS hearing. I've always harped on transportation. I'm glad you're cutting it $10 million. I think there's a lot more fat in there to cut, to be very honest with you. And I'll talk about that at the transportation. Over the next 6 weeks, schools are going to be testing every day, grades 3 to 5. Why is that? Why are we continuing to do this? We don't know what the results are. I don't know what you do with the results. And I know that the parents themselves don't see the results for about a year. So what are we doing? Because clearly we're not using the teacher's ability, because they're not teaching, they're monitoring tests. And I talked about this last year. And I think the most important point is, in some of these inclusion schools specifically, it's all hands on deck. So whether you're a SPED teacher or a regular teacher, whatever regular means, you're also required to help out. So the kids who receive traditional services or needed services are getting zero for the next 5 weeks. So I still don't understand what we're doing here.
So this week we begin our park testing. The park assessments, our assessments are aligned to the Common Core. They're mandated by the state of Massachusetts. Our students are taking them either online or on paper. This requirement is not only a requirement dictated by the state, but also by the federal government. It is a summative, it's intended to be a summative assessment of what the students learn during the year, and the results do come back to us in fall. They should not be taking a year.
Okay. Well, we need to start working on changing that, because I don't understand why we have teachers who are making very good salaries standing at the front of the room watching kids take tests hour after hour after hour after hour. As true education as true education is passing them by, and we'll talk about that as we get deeper into the classroom. The excess pool. Can we please talk about this? Because in 1 second, we're talking about an excess pool of teachers who need spots. And then in the very next statement, we're talking about how we're posting these jobs, hoping to get better qualified people. And generally, coming from a union shop in Public Works, if there's not enough work for the people we have, we don't post new jobs. So can you just please walk me through that at a cost of $13.3 million?
Yep. It is certainly an expensive and I think sometimes not intuitive way to reach what I think is a very admirable and research-backed goal, which is improving teacher effectiveness and diversity. So the way that our excess pool works is that in the spring, and I'm probably not going to do as good a job at describing this as our assistant superintendent for human capital, who will be here next week, is the excess pool swells. It actually gets quite large as teachers' positions are eliminated and they move around. Excuse me. The vast majority of that pool of teachers finds another permanent position within BPS. By allowing the pool to swell early in the year, it allows 100% of our schools to enjoy the benefits of mutual consent, which used to be available to just a few of our autonomous schools. The result, though, by doing it so early in the year, is that come the fall, we are often still left with the fact that the pool hasn't gone back down to zero. And we offer those teachers positions of suitable professional capacity since they are those of them that are tenured. So those are the mechanics of why we do it. It allows us to open post months earlier than we would have previously. Does that help explain the?
I don't know. We'll talk to the human capital people about it. I don't want to get too deeply into it. I have more questions about it.
Yeah.
But I am concerned that we're spending $13 million plus on people who really aren't working when we could use that in the classroom for kids who need assistance. So it's a bit confusing to me. I think my last question is going to be to Carlton. And as Councilor O'Malley said, you've always been a straight shooter, and I appreciate that. We're spending $29.1 million on these buildings without the master plan. So are we confident that the $29 million we're spending on windows in buildings, are these buildings going to be ours? Are they going to even be open?
So, yes, thank you, Counselor. Are we confident? We're confident to the point that we can be. And what do I mean by that? We are working with the team, and we're getting information from the team now to say, listen, we are investing in these schools. Add that into your calculus when you talk about what comes next. So, for instance, we know that we cannot make an investment using Massachusetts School Building Authority money and then not have that facility continue to be used for educational purposes. We're not even at the point talking about not using schools at the moment. We're talking about what do the schools and what do the buildings need in order to become educationally viable as we move forward. So we are very mindful of that requirement. We want to make sure that we're making proper investments. We want to make sure that we're being good stewards of public funds. Yes, to the extent that we can. Now, should the team come back and say, you know what, there's one particular building or a set of buildings that we don't think you need to use going forward, and yet we've made investments in it, it will become then our responsibility to figure out what we do next and how do we continue to live true to the terms of that investment. We know that we cannot be in a situation, as has happened in prior years, where we are counter to some of our commitments with the state. So we're making sure I have email that talks about this, how we are moving forward in that direction to make sure that we're not going to be in that situation.
Okay. I'm going to get the hook. So I just want to ask my last question specific to District 5. You know, the do more with less thing, you know, when I was in the Parks Department, when I was in the Public Works Department, there was a lot of that going around. It's not as easy to do it with kids in a classroom, clearly. But some of the cuts that we're making, you know, I'll speak District 5 specific. BCLA, talking about cutting a librarian, which would lose their accreditation. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The Roosevelt School, they've been asked to cut $250,000 to $300,000 from their budget, which means one of the administrators are going to have to go. If the administrator goes, that means there's only one administrator for a 2-building campus. And because the bowling building tends to call out the principals 2-3 times a week to go to some meetings that nobody knows about, that means there's going to be no administrator at the Roosevelt campus at a single time. So these cuts, you know, no cut is easy, but I don't think that you guys have done a decent enough job on trying to figure out exactly logical cuts to make. And to cut the Roosevelt School, which has been doing an unbelievable job, and I don't want to hear about unsustainable structure and all that stuff, I get it. But to cut an administrator on a 2-building campus and have a principal traveling to the bowling building every 3 times a week, it makes no sense to me. So as we get deeper into the hearings, and I know we have a lot more to go over, these are the questions I'm going to be asking. So I hope that District 5 related issues specifically, that's who I represent, are going to be addressed, because we've got to talk about school choice. We've got a lot of things. I got a call this weekend from a very very good friend of mine whose husband is an EMS guy, wants to stay. They're moving because she could throw a football into the Roosevelt backyard, but didn't get in, and didn't get into the second choice, the third choice, or the fourth choice. This is the problem we're running into. These are the problems we have to decide upon. So now we're losing a very good family and a person who works for EMS who had no intention of leaving, but can't swing, Catholic school for all of them. So, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Council Baker.
Good morning. Thank you for your time, Doctor, and your team. I'd like to talk a little bit about, you have educational supplies. There's a decrease in the external funds of almost $1 million, and then in the department history it says 863. So those combined, can you explain how we made that cut there? What is that? Is that the elimination of the Campbell Resource people?
Sorry, so could you say that once more? It was which field you're looking
Okay,
at?
so under supplies and materials, line 53800, educational supplies and materials. So it's on external funds and in the department history, two different numbers. Is that the elimination of the Campbell Resource workers there?
No, that's not. The workers for the Campbell Resource Center would have been both in the baseline data for FY16 and in 17. That was a cut we made last year.
Okay.
The 800, are typical supplies for instructional materials or goods and that we're purchasing. That the external funds reduction is what you're seeing there is our grant reduction. A lot of the discretionary spending on materials and supplies are done through grants.
Okay.
And so as we
grants
see a
are reduced?
reduction in grant revenues, you'll see a reduction in that account for that reason.
Okay, and what are we seeing in that, back to the Campbell Resource, what are we seeing in for, like, how is that working out? It didn't seem like a good plan to me. That was a distribution location where all the goods would come in, they would break it up by school. Can you explain to me what's going on there now? How are we getting the schools their supplies and materials?
The decision to move away from the central warehouse had to do with a lot of our vendors being able to provide direct shipments to our schools for custodial supplies and other materials. And so we haven't received feedback that it is not working. I think one of the challenges we had in the central warehouse had to do with some of our science kits. We were ordering in bulk and then creating science kits that went to schools. And I think there was some change in how we did that work, but it was all able to be managed. And I think part of the reason that it was a smooth transition had to do with this, the direct shipment had started before we eliminated the warehouse. It wasn't a completely new sort of operation for us to figure out.
Okay, and did so do you have staying away from teachers, the support staff, custodians, and whoever else? What do we have for layoffs this year for workers away from teachers and that whole excess pool and all that? Are there projected layoffs this year?
At this point in the process, we don't know by union the number of layoffs. I don't know if, in terms of like the custodians unions, we're not anticipating a reduction there. We did make a reduction in custodial overtime last year. That was about a management strategy. And then in terms of other positions, there are some management positions that are being reduced, others being created. So we're not seeing any significant layoffs in terms of that.
And can you talk a little bit about like the nursing staff? How are schools supposed to have like a half position for a nurse? How are we not at a minimum, like each school have a nurse for a full day? Like, how do we manage that?
We work with the nursing team, Health Services, Maureen Stark's team, and nurses are allocated on two bases. The first is overall population and the number of kids at the school. And the other, a term that I've learned from Maureen, is acuity, how much need there is at a particular school. So if you have a number of kids who have high needs, either medications that need to be delivered, or some of our special needs populations have more severe medical issues that they need to be cared for, that could trigger a full-time nurse. They then try and look at schools to identify places where they can pair schools based on geography and schedule. So where there's a half-time nurse at one school, if there's a school close by that they can pair it with, so that in the case of a situation, the nurse can move back and forth.
Okay. Carlton, can we talk a little bit about, and this is kind of a, I think it's a 4-year-old deal, the North Bennett Street School. Did we get 3 buildings there from North Bennett Street?
So for the
Bring
Elliott,
me up to speed
Yes.
on the Elliott. So the North Bennett Street schools, the 3 buildings that we got, or 2 buildings, whatever they are. How much did we spend on those 3 in total? And how far along are they? When will they be coming online? And then also, can you speak a little bit about the building on Commercial Street? How much, what was the buy-in cost? What do we plan on putting in there? And who's going to be in all these?
so I can answer most of your questions. The last one about the purchase price of the 585 Commercial Street is the one that I can't answer. I don't have that information. But I do know that it was acquired using surplus property funds. So overall, the Elliott School, which originally started on Charter Street,
Right.
expanded to a K-8 school. And so the city acquired,
Within the existing building, they expanded to K?
well, no, because they needed more space. That building on Charter Street was a very small building. It was two-strand, was not able to accommodate the growth, but it was a highly successful school, lots of demand, and it also helps provide a downtown school option for families in the downtown area at large. So the city acquired the 152 North Bennett Street is one property, and also 585 Commercial Street is the other property. And so now,
the North Bennett Street School was only one building that we
correct,
got?
that's correct. That's one building on North Bennett Street, which is under construction now.
What did we pay for that?
That I don't have. So I don't have the actual acquisition costs. That was not part of our city capital. That came from another funding source, but we can get that information for you.
Yep.
All right. So the North Bennett Street School currently under construction, as well as 585 Commercial Street. That building right now is currently in use, so we have students in that building now. The ultimate picture will have the 585, 152 North Bennett, and I think it's 52 Charter, whatever it is, on Charter Street. Those 3 properties will all be part of the Elliott K through 8, the innovation school. It's approaching 1,000 kids will be able to attend this school, so it provides
Just
access.
K through 8.
K through 8, that's correct. It was under the Access to Excellence program, where we were trying to provide, more high-quality seats to more families, as well as it's solving the need to get elementary seats in the downtown area. This was a convention that was used to be able to open up 585 faster than it might have already been open. So we were able to get kids in there quickly doing this method. It's been still highly demanded. There was a little bit of a delay in the project, so we've been out a couple of times with Councilor Lamontina to talk about a delay in the steel. I mean, getting into a little bit minutia, but there was a little bit of a delay in the project so that we were not able to open the North Bennett Street building as soon as we had originally anticipated. There's a little bit of a rollover effect on the 585 Commercial, but at the end of the day, by 2018, September 2018, we'll be able to open up the 2 properties I just mentioned that were acquired for the Elliott School, and
Didn't they
have
get
kids.
Towson Street too? Wasn't there a building on Towson Street, or is that just a back lot?
that's just the back
address?
lot, right? So Tileston Street is kind of, it allows the construction crews to come through.
And so keeping Commercial Street out of it, what was the total budget that went into the North Bennett Street?
Okay, so,
But how much was it cost for renovation there?
all right, so I'm on page 216 for Elliott School access improvements. No, Elliott School, 585 Commercial Street, and North Bennett's on 217. So North Bennett Street has a total authorization for expenditures, $23,018,000.
That's not including what it costs to buy the building.
That's correct. Well, actually, I take that back, because I'm looking under the grants line. So I see $4,390,000 under grants, and then it's $18.6 million for existing capital. So I will confirm with the Office of Budget Management, but it appears to me from this document that the grants line of $4.4 million.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Eleanor, how are you?
Hanging in there,
You're
thank
okay?
you.
Okay.
Sorry for all the coughing.
Okay, on page 27 in the partnerships there, I noticed that Generations is funded for FY16 and 17. I just wanted to point that out to make a point of clarification there for you. You don't need to answer that, but, and my last question was one that, kind of piggybacking on what Counselor Jackson had mentioned, and it's been bounced around for a year or even longer about the amount of seats that we have. I've heard as much as 90,000. We have 57,000 pupils. Can you?
Yep.
How do we answer that? Why the confusion? What is the actual number? And can we just get a little bit of clarification on that?
Yep. I'm not going to probably be able to satisfy every element of the question you just asked, but I'll tell you how we think about it and what we're doing. So I would distinguish between two different kinds of capacity. There's the bricks and mortar capacity, which even that, there's a lot of subjectivity. Do you do total fire code? Do you assume our class size maximums within the rough constraints of the building? But call that physical capacity of the bricks and mortar.
So that would be if you took the actual building and what their by fire code or whatever, how many children will be able to put in there?
Exactly. Another way to define capacity would be programmatic capacity. If you look at the teachers who we have present, the programs that we offer, how many seats could we fill with the staff we currently have? My understanding for the report that Councilor Jackson referred to from a year or two ago was that previous report had looked at programmatic capacity, which would be quite different from physical capacity. We are actively looking into this issue, as you can imagine, and collecting data. And as soon as we have good data, we are absolutely committed to and looking forward to posting every little bit of it on our website. This is not intended at all to be something where we hold back anything. We are deeply committed to transparency in all matters financial. We're very proud of all of the information you can get on our website about where we spend every dollar in every single school budget. So as soon as we're working hard to get the data to a point where we feel like we can communicate with our public the distinction between those two.
So that 90,000 is probably what would fit in the buildings at full capacity.
Yeah, that number, I believe, came from the work done by McKinsey. And so we're still trying to understand exactly what was in there. And I don't want to speak on their behalf, but my initial understanding is that was closer to a bricks and mortar physical capacity with some consideration, it seems, baked in about our class size maximum.
Okay. And do you have something to add to that, Carlton? No?
Well, I was just going to add that one way that you can also calculate capacity is using a square foot takeoff. And so you look at this total square footage divided by the number of students per classroom is another way to get to that 90,000 number.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle of how many can we fit in the rooms and how many programmatically can a teacher, if a classroom, X amount of teachers is 25 children, I think that's...
We have to start with programmatic capacity.
Okay. And my last comment that I want to say, we had spoken a lot about restoration of high school funds. You know, I have some, I don't have any high schools in my district. I'm all middle schools, and there's some small middle schools that have, that I think unfairly big hits in their budget. So, you know, I'd like to see some of that restored. I understand that we're trying to make cuts. You know, the CLAP is a very small school, and we're trying to keep that viable and to take the hit that they took. I just think we should look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Baker. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Superintendent and your team, and thank you for being here. So this is my first budget process. I was sworn in January. And while excited for BPS and all the conversations and many of my questions I'll keep for the later hearings, but as someone who is stepping into this space and peeling back the layers now that I'm in this space, I must say many times it's very confusing. And so I can only imagine what it's like for a resident. I'm representing District 4, particularly sort of the lay citizen, to process all this. And so I remain hopeful, just being, a product of BPS schools. I went to 5 of them, and they were all excellent. So I remain hopeful that one day it will be less confusing, and every school in every part of the city will be excellent. But I just have a couple of sort of big picture questions, and I think it's more about strategy. So we're talking about investments, new investments, continued investments. At the same time, we're talking about proposed cuts, proposed reductions. And so what I've heard from quite a few parents is, where's the sort of plan? I don't understand this idea of investing in things anew while cutting things that we know to be working for particular students or particular schools. I don't understand that strategy. So I'd really like to understand why we sort of take that strategy, that approach, and is there any thought to think about doing things a little bit differently? Oh, they might have to adjust your mic.
Yeah. No. There's a little button down here.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Campbell, for your question. Absolutely. I think strategy has to actually drive the budgeting process. So we have a system that is highly dependent on movement of students because we have a full choice district. So enrollment changes have a significant impact on the budget year in, year out, because the dollars really truly do follow the kids. We also have a system where there isn't, as you said, truly quality seats in every part of the city. And that's our commitment, to get to a place where any student, any family that wants a quality seat close to home, a tier 1 or tier 2 school, that they have one close to home, that they are not having to get on a bus and go an hour to the school and back. So part of our strategy has to be increase the number of quality seats in every single neighborhood. Absolutely. What we did this year in our budgeting process, we did minimize cuts in student-weighted formula to schools. Ultimately, it landed at about $5 million. We started off about $12.5 million. Some schools did experience some cuts due to enrollment changes to student-weighted formula, but most of the cuts actually came from central office and finding more efficiencies in the system. Long term, what our goal has to be is, how do we make sure there's quality seats in every neighborhood so we're transporting fewer kids? How do we make sure that we expand capacity of our highest quality performing schools? How do we consolidate schools where they may not be as much of a choice, that may not be as performing as high? And ultimately, when we consolidate schools, it's not meant to be taking resources away. It's about actually reinvesting the dollars. So when schools do consolidate, it actually adds programming to a school.
So I'm going to push back at least a little bit on the cuts piece, because as I've been since January going around to various schools, starting with the schools in District 4 and also visiting the schools just outside of District 4 where District 4 students attend. And so, for example, at Young Achievers, they have real cuts that they have to make up for. And this is a school that has a reputation of doing really well. It's STEM, it's K through 8. But the weighted formula changes really affect them. And this is a school that has a growing population, not an increasing one. Or the Philbrick. Although the Philbrick can't point to budget cuts this year, they have a part-time nurse. I was happy to hear Councilor Baker talk about the part-time nurse. And this is an elementary school. And so you have, when the part-time nurse isn't there in the 2 days that he or she can show up, you have the principal or the assistant to the principal sort of acting as nurse. And so when I look at, I understand the importance, students are moving and we want to make sure that we have quality education. I think we have to start with what we have and do it well. And so I just really would like us to think about bigger picture, if this is the right approach. I think I get a lot of parents who are asking, a lot of families are asking, I'm not understanding this plan. If we're bringing in extended language time to sort of a second cohort of students or a second set of schools, but we have to say, wait a minute, we can't actually roll this out because we don't have the funds. Where's the planning around all this before we actually roll out the initiative in the first place? So I'd really like us to begin to think bigger picture about just strategy overall that makes sense. I know I have a short amount of time, so I'll continue, and I will ask these additional questions of sort of later panels. I was looking at the partnerships, and sadly, the decline in the partnerships. We all know that partnerships really make schools great, particularly individual schools. The Orchard Gardens, I think, is like the premier example of a school that went from a level 5 to a level 1 because of great partnerships. They saw those partnerships be reduced, and then all of a sudden they're sort of trickling back to level 3 status, possibly. And so in thinking creatively about partnerships, and there are some schools that are really good and have a school leader that's very entrepreneurial. So I think about organizations. So I sit on the board for an organization that actually works at East Boston High School. They do social emotional literacy work. They had no connection actually with BPS or the central office. So immediately I said, okay, executive director, you might want to go meet with the head of the social emotional learning. And here's an organization that has a reputation of doing really great work with not only young folks, but also those who are currently incarcerated. This is also an organization that would be willing to probably take their services into other schools, possibly for free, as they sort of prove and test their models. So I'd love to see us think creatively about how do we get improved partnerships, better partnerships from organizations that are doing the work currently with BPS or those that are not, that might be willing to give their services to certain schools because they want to make a difference for many, many reasons. I think there's some creative things that we could do around partnerships. Of course, I hate to see a reduction in partnerships. That's just a thought I had.
Councillor Campbell, sorry, if I can just make a quick comment on that. You are absolutely right. Partnerships are absolutely critical to services that we provide to young people in our schools. One of the things we saw was that the kind of partnership work was done kind of based on, a lot of it was relationship by relationship, school by school. So one of the first things that we did do was ask our Deputy Superintendent of Strategy to bring together, like actually do an inventory of all the different partnerships that exist, and then start creating some tools and resources for our schools to actually go out and get resources, but do it in a way where it's coherent, and with the dollars that we have centrally to distribute them out in a more equitable way. We're about to launch a website called Partner BPS, where we will be providing these sort of tools online to our schools. And with the partnership dollars, we hope to expand these partnership dollars in the future to actually allocate these dollars out using a formula that's really based on the demographics of where the students are actually living, not where they attend school, but where they're living, because we know there are social emotional needs, there are medical needs, there are a variety of needs that these partnerships are critical in helping to address. So,
No, thank you for
agree.
that. And I just have two more things. One is related to the facilities master plan. I know that's a big issue. Even when I was a candidate, parents brought it up. I applaud Councilor O'Malley in sort of bringing it up again because I didn't know all of that history. And I hope that the timeline that we sort of jotted down a lot of notes is relatively realistic. But one follow-up question related to how do we select schools to get those investments, particularly schools where there's a possibility that after the facilities plan, we may not actually use that school anymore. Or so how do we choose the schools? I imagine we want to choose schools that we know this school is going nowhere, so that we're not investing in something that we may suddenly not even be using anymore in the future.
So let me start off, and then Carlton can add. The timeline that Carlton outlined in terms of gathering the data started with a deep assessment of 19 schools for educational programming and for the physical plant. Originally, we had intended for the rest of the schools to be assessed by winter of 2016 at the end of this year, calendar year. However, we have been pushing very hard, especially under the leadership of the senior deputy. We asked our senior deputy superintendent, Barbara Dean Williams, to work with the engineering team to get to our schools earlier. I always want to condition expectations, but our goal is to have as much data as possible before we go into the next fiscal year. I think what you're also hinting at is the possibility of like school consolidations. I think there's a great opportunity in Boston to look at grade configuration to bring more coherence to the system. There are 21 different grade configurations within BPS. Families are having to navigate. You said you went to 5 different BPS schools, but that's not abnormal. Families are jumping from school to school. I think our very first step is to look at more coherence in grade patterns and look at where we can have some schools maybe expand grade levels, some schools like consolidate grade levels to create better feeder patterns. The Lee Academy and Young Achievers were a great example of this year. They said, we're going to work together. One school is going to, I believe, serve up to 3rd grade, and then the rest of the school from 4th through 6th, and they've created a feeder pattern. I think those are where our biggest opportunities are, but we have to get this data right. If we don't have this data, we can't make some of the decisions we need to make.
That's helpful.
I know you might be running out of your allotted time, but if I could respond really quickly to one of the other points you made.
Well, I have one more, actually.
Go right ahead.
We'll circle back this time. So my last question is related, talking again about young achievers, but it's the weighted formula. And understanding that the inclusion model, so as someone who used to represent kids in special ed cases, pushing for certain types of placements, inclusion, it doesn't always work for every type of student. And particularly when talking about kids who have autism. And so in looking at how we make changes to the weighted formula, are there caveats for certain subsets of students within this weighted formula? Or when we say special ed weighted formula, it's applied for any student who's identified as special ed? Can you explain that?
Yeah, within special education weights for weighted student funding, there's actually 3 categories, 3 broad categories. Those with low severity, medium severity, and high severity. The low and medium severity are what sometimes referred to as resource room students.
Yep.
Kids who are served primarily in general education seats, but then are either there's push in or pull out supports. When we get into the high severity category, that's where we start to look by specific disability group, and there are, looking at my chart here, 13 different categories that break the students up: autism, emotional impairment, learning disabilities. And when we evaluate weighted student funding, we are evaluating the services that are needed for those students based on that program. So the model for serving the students is different depending on the student's disability.
And the cuts are made based on the changes to all those weighted formulas, or one weighted formula? Which one?
There were 2 primary changes for autism and emotional impairment. And we also made a change.
Which is at the high level.
At the high level for those in either substantially separate or inclusion settings. And then we also made a change to how we project students. We have a number of schools that serve inclusion students where we don't yet know who the students are that they will serve in those inclusionary settings and what their disability is. So we project them as an unknown disability while we go through the IEP process in the spring. And so for those students, we were projecting them at the highest possible weight. This year, we're shifting our strategy to project them at the average weight, and it has to do with the reconciliations that we do in the fall for projected to actual enrollment.
I just have one quick comment. That chart that you're looking at, is that available to us? Can I see
yes,
that? Can
absolutely.
I have a copy of that?
Absolutely. This is the
Okay.
what I'm looking at is the district-wide, what we refer to as the weighted student funding template that shows. We have them posted on our website, but I will make sure to get you a copy that shows both overall district enrollment by category, comparing last year to this year, and the funding that students receive, and then school by school, you can receive a.
And I would just say my biggest concern with the budget overall, outside of just strategy and how we think about things, is the changes to those weighted formulas. So I look forward to sort of talking more about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Martina.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Chang. This is my 10th hearing. It's your first.
10th year.
10th year. Just a quick question, Doctor. So you're coming from Los Angeles with over 650,000 students in that city. What was your biggest challenge you feel in Boston? your biggest challenge in Boston right now, particularly with the budget?
In particular to the
The
budget,
budget, just curious,
I think it's
besides the weather.
the weather.
Oh, you
We had
lucked out
3
this
snow
year.
days. I was
lucked
very
out.
happy. We had 3. In terms of the budget process, I think it's some of the challenges have already been raised, which is the budgeting process starts very early on the system. And it starts early, as Eleanor did state, because we wanted to put a stake in the ground with early hiring. But because the budget process starts early, we have to project a lot about what the student enrollment patterns may look like, what might be the needs of the students that we eventually serve. And I think that's one thing. A second thing is we have a lot of schools. We have 124 schools for 57,000 students. So we have some schools that are extremely small. And because these schools are extremely small, they still require the same programming. So we want to make sure they have the programming that they deserve. And so the size of some of our schools are a challenge. I would say those 2 things.
So it's the size of schools and the number of schools
Yes.
that we have. So have you really been looking at a plan to downsize and maybe close some of these schools and neighborhoods, and maybe, are you looking at that right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a conversations that principals are already beginning to have, because some of our school principals are having a lot of challenges to trying to make the dollars work for them. Any sort of school reconfiguration or consolidation must be done in a transparent way. We need the data, so we're waiting on the data on the facilities master plan. We are still gathering, we need to gather data, historical data on where is the demand for schools. We need to look at data on which schools are really performing very well or not performing well. We need to look at quality seats in every single neighborhood. There's a lot that needs to come into it. So this is going to be a long process.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've been waiting for this master facility plan for many, many years too, so. Because I could tell you, in my district that I represent, I have classrooms on the stairwells. I have them on stages. I have them in gyms. I mean, it's really, so I can't wait to get this plan. But something I want to mention while we're looking at this facility master plan, something really ticks me off. The bathrooms, I mean, I get embarrassed when I'm going to a school and parents are complaining to me that their kids can't use a bathroom. I mean, that's something simple. If we're going to spend $21 million, let's spend money in all these bathrooms and making sure that there's paper towels and there's toilet paper. I mean, that's something that we should be doing right away. And that really, really concerns me that I go to a bathroom and it's not very pleasant.
May I comment really quickly?
Please.
Completely agree. Completely
Please.
unacceptable. I walk bathrooms when I would visit schools.
Yep.
One of the things that we put in place this year through our operations team is this. We instituted this a couple of months ago. Our senior deputy gets reports on every single bathroom every single week now. And there's a name for it, Carlton. What was the name for that program?
Operation Fresh and Clean.
It's absolutely unacceptable. So we want centrally to understand and to make sure that every bathroom is clean. They have the supplies they need. In addition, they smell good.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the supplies and on the line item for custodians, it says there's no money in it.
No money in custodians.
And supplies. If you look on the supplies,
Can you address
and it
that?
says custodial supplies says 0. Is that a wrong thing? Custodial?
I think what you're
That it?
probably
Right,
looking at is an
custodial.
artifact of how we code something. I can
All right.
assure you that we have supplies for custodians and
Where would that be? Would it be under, no, is that right? Am I looking at right?
Custodial supply,
It says
Yeah,
0.
but it's been 0.
Yeah, it's been 0, so I'm just curious. I mean,
That will be fixed.
that will be fixed?
Yes.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And then another thing I hear a lot of time I go visit schools, teachers complain about they don't have supplies. So I hear that constantly when I go to schools. So I see that and I don't know how to allocate supplies to schools. Is it evenly allocated? Is it supplies for paper, pens, books? I don't know how you do it.
We allocate dollars to the majority of our schools through weighted student funding. And then the schools decide within that how they want to allocate versus supplies, teaching staff, contracts, partnerships. So we don't make a separate allocation for supplies. In individual schools, we do check. We have a process for sitting down with a team of people to review budgets with each individual school. And we have minimum standards that we make sure each school budgets for supplies at each level. It depends on elementary versus middle versus high school. And then some schools will supplement supplies through their Title I dollars and then also through efforts they may do through fundraising through their BEDF account.
And then 2 more questions on this. And in the EECs and ELCs, they're receiving $4,700 to $9,300 per pupil more than a traditional school. So why is it that the West Zone will get $9,000 and the East Boston will get $4,200? Like, why?
There are about 11,000 students who are grades K1 to 2
Yeah.
that don't get any supplement.
No, I understand that.
Yeah,
I just want to compare the EECs and ELCs. The West Zone has 98 students and they get 9,286 per student.
So,
And I hate to be parochial, I'm just curious.
No,
And what is that money being used for? And yeah.
and part of our move around the EECs, the ELCs is a commitment to more equitable distribution of
Yep.
resources. When we went to weighted student funding now 5 years ago, you saw a lot of disparity in terms of schools that are serving the same population of students, but very different staffing models, very different per pupil spending. And weighted student funding brought in line much greater equity across all of our schools. The early learning centers and early education centers were one category that was largely left untouched by weighted student funding, with a commitment, a public commitment to revisit it. When my first year as budget director 3 years ago, we were getting a lot of pressure to revisit it. So this is the year that we looked at bringing greater equity and consistency across what it was that they received for a per pupil supplement. There's still some work to be done. So it's largely an artifact of the model that was in place when we went to weighted student funding. And then we've revisited it and looked across. But the biggest difference between each of the schools and the supplement that they receive is in the staffing assumptions and how they staff the extended time.
The extending time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the money's going?
This supplement is intended to do the surround care time. That's correct.
Okay. And then in regards to the partnership, something that we really should be looking at is we should be using all our colleges in Boston. Every school should be, college should be assigned a school that we could work with. I mean, that's something that we should be doing. I mean, as part of the pilot program for the city of Boston. And hopefully that will bring some resources to the schools. But Doctor, welcome again to Boston, and it's great to have you and your team here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor
If I
Presley.
could just,
Oh,
I'm
sure.
sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to quickly, the facilities account for custodial supplies is a 53909, is miscellaneous supplies, non-instructional supplies in custodians, and that has been funded consistent with last year. So that's the account that we use for custodial supplies.
What count?
53909. And it's in our facilities management department, which is 101040.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Presley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So proud of the tough but I think fair and thoughtful questions offered by my colleagues thus far. A number of my questions have already been asked and answered. As my colleagues have alluded to, we're going to do our best to operate at 30,000 feet, but that might not happen. So picking up on a point, in one of your answers to Councilor Baker's questions, it was mentioned about vendors. And, you know, certainly as a city, we're trying to do our due diligence to make sure that we are building wealth within our communities and supporting local, you know, including when it comes to supplies. So I'm just, you don't have to answer it now, but could you please, if you don't know, come prepared in the near future to speak to your contracts, and we want to make sure that those dollars are not being outsourced. Would like to know, how many vendor contracts we have, how many of them are local, and how many of them are M and WBE. I do also just want to say to Councilor Campbell's point in terms of greater strategy and sort of approach, I struggle because people will often champion the need for full funding. And I'm always honest in saying I'm not sure what that means, because to me, actually, we could get more money, and I do believe we need to make a greater investment. But if we don't all agree as to what we prioritize for the dedication of those dollars, it will not change outcomes. Mark Zuckerberg donated millions of dollars, to the Newark public school system, and their outcomes didn't change because there wasn't agreement in where to prioritize those dollars. So, to me, it all comes back to that. I wish that every school believed in the need for emotional competency and resilience of our students, so that they can be prepared vessels for whatever's being offered. So I say all that to say that I very much appreciate the verbally expressed commitment and the vision specifically around SPED, and my focus is on SPED transition, and also for an investment in social-emotional wellness supports. But I continue to feel that the vision is there, but we're not investing in the supports to realize the vision. So for example, Dr. Chang, you said we have 124 schools, 57,000 students. And I do commend you for prioritizing social-emotional learning and wellness, so much in fact that we now have a cabinet level, post in our assistant superintendent of social-emotional learning and wellness. But for 124 schools, 57,000 students, how can we support those students with 55 school psychologists, 8 social workers, 6 pupil investment, officers, whatever is the appropriate title, 115 nurses, and 100 guidance counselors? So again, 100 guidance counselors, 115 nurses, 6 pupil investment or adjustment folks, 8 social workers, and 55 school psychologists. I think people sort of stereotype and singularly define who's traumatized. But trauma is any disruptive act. It is not limited to exposure to homicide or domestic violence or the residual impacts of the marathon. It is any disruptive act. And, I just, want to know how we're going to get to this robust vision to invest in these holistic supports of our students, because, again, you cannot teach the whole child if they're not whole.
Right.
So how do we get there?
So I'm going to try to stay at 30,000
Okay.
feet as well. You're absolutely right. And when we look at, it's not just social emotional needs, it's also our cultural and linguistic needs. It's making sure our young people's identities are being honored. It's everything. It's high quality academic instruction. And so we can think of all this work in isolation or siloing, but what is more powerful if it's all coming together as what you said, one vision. We are in the middle of our strategic implementation plan. We finished the first 100 days. We're looking at all the initiatives that are in the system. I count over 58 different initiatives in the system. We got to get to a point where we say, here are the initiatives that we really care about. This is what we're going to invest in. This is what we're going to focus on over the next 3 to 5 years. I will give you a kind of a preview of this. Our number one initiatives, our number one focus area is going to be implement an inclusive, rigorous, and culturally, linguistically sustaining pre-K instructional plan that serves the development of the whole child. That means our social-emotional learning assistant superintendent, our office English language learning superintendent, our special ed, our opportunity achievement gap, our academic assistant superintendents, they're working together to create a framework for instruction in BPS. That guarantees that the instructions that's happening in every single classroom brings all this together. The social and emotional needs of a young child isn't just cared for through a social worker or through a nurse. It's through that teacher that meets that child in the classroom every single day. That means that's a lot of professional development. It's a lot of coherence. It's a lot of people working together.
I agree. But I wouldn't be me if I didn't say I still want to see an increase in those numbers.
Of course.
So,
of
okay.
course.
All right. So in addition to advocating for a greater investment in social-emotional wellness, one of the issues that I've worked very closely with you on is reforming and improving school food, which actually works in partnership with the facilities master plan, because one of the reasons why the food is outsourced and it isn't palatable and it isn't nutrient dense and it's being wasted is because, we need more kitchens. I think only 50% of our facilities have kitchens. So my dream is that we're at one day we're farm to school. That's my dream. That's going to create jobs. That's healthy behaviors. That's everything. But I just wanted to say, within the master facilities plan, I just want you to be considering our kitchens specifically, because that's really the only way. We're tinkering at the edges, but the real reform that we need to see around improving the quality of school food, and given food insecurity 1 in 4, and our students receive 70% of their calories at school, we've got to address that. So that's more of a statement. Okay.
May I just say
Sure.
publicly that it is part of our audit of every single school. We are considering kitchens.
Okay.
And we're in our final stages to bring in a national expert to lead our food services division.
Okay. Now, in partnership with my advocacy around school food, and in concert, with my good colleagues, Counselor Campbell and Asabi George, my chief capital priority is water infrastructure and access. And I want to know, according to what has been allocated for that 5-year plan for the water infrastructure, and I do thank you for recognizing our facilities are old and for doing lead testing, but certainly we're concerned with those findings. And so I want to know, where are we in that process and how does that impact the capital plan that has been proposed?
Carlton?
Right. So good afternoon, Counselor.
Good afternoon.
So we are in the process of, as you know, converting schools that are on bottled water to actual water fountains to the extent possible. We have a pilot program that's happening now. As you know, that we ran into some hiccups in terms of the installation of those devices. This is all coming under our Environmental and Sustainability Improvements Project. There's $2.4 million roughly allocated over time, about $1.3 million to be spent this year for this and other work under that project. But we definitely want to move forward. We want to make sure that we're working with our partners to ensure that as these installations do occur, that they are coming up lead-free. We've had examples where we went back and tested existing schools, as you know, and some of the schools did come back with levels that were higher than they should have been. We converted them to bottled water until we can figure out why that is the case. We want to make sure that we're being smart about it. We're being thoughtful, working with our partners, the Boston Water and Sewer Commission, to ensure that what we're doing as we move forward is in the best interest of students.
Okay. So I have a ton of questions in terms of exposure and things like that, which we're not going to get into here. There is a hearing that the three of us are doing together. So just putting you on notice, we will be digging in much deeper, to that. Okay.
Right.
I did want to just say, again, getting back to just strategy and sort of shared values. Again, we can have more funding, but if we don't all agree. So, to me, everybody should be prioritizing social-emotional wellness investment and supports, because we've seen that it is not only success in life, but improved academic outcomes, okay? This is ultimately about access and quality and equity, okay? But the other thing that I would describe as a value is that I want our students to have both a strong start and a strong finish. And I feel like we're being put in a position to choose. And I would like for you to speak to that, because I don't want to have to choose between, so we expand the seats to try to keep Boston families here, but then they still feel either because we're divesting from high schools, or if I think about my parents who have children who receive special education services, they feel like their kid is going to fall off a cliff, even if we can firm up their confidence, in those earlier years. So, can we just agree as a value across the system that our students deserve to have both a strong start and a strong finish?
I agree with you.
Okay.
Period.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just make those investments accordingly, because it's not even a fair choice,
That's
okay.
right.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you. So in that vein, could you just talk about Madison Park High School and what's happening there? And, and I'm concerned about all of our schools, but this has sort of been, the bruised eye of the system based on decades of neglect and divestment and a lot of broken promises there. So what is happening at Madison Park?
So, three things. Number one, very optimistic about the new leadership. They have been in leadership for about almost a year now. Executive Director Kevin McCaskill, Headmaster Sean Shackelford, they are leading the effort to write the new innovation plan for their school. That plan will need to be approved by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Commissioner. We're looking forward to bringing that forward to him in the next month. We also have applied for a grant through DESE for additional investment as part of the school transformation.
I'm sorry, Superintendent. So currently, are we investing since, and our able chairman here has often made the point that, historically for vocational schools, you're making a greater investment per pupil at a vocational school than you would any other school. So are we making a greater
Yes, we are
investment there
continuing that. We
comparatively?
are continuing the additional investment we have always made at Madison Park. But I think what's more important is some of the internal organizing and programming that needs to happen at the school. As part of the rewriting of the innovation plan, we actually took a deep analysis of the 19 pathways that are at the school, and we mapped them against where are the potential jobs that we anticipate in the city of Boston. There's some programs at the school that will help and lead students to a job coming out of high school. And there are some programs there that are not as likely to get them into a career pathway to a living wage. And our job is to create pathways in the city, not only at Madison Park, but at all high schools. Career technical education, side-by-side college prep, where we're preparing kids not only for college, but if they so choose to choose another path and to a living wage job, that's what we want to do. So Madison Park specifically, in the middle of rewriting the innovation plan, almost finished. Leadership is in place at that school. Analysis of all the pathways. Our hope is to actually make sure that if we get the right pathways at this school, we can actually build more pathways moving forward, because there are going to be jobs in the future that we just cannot anticipate right now.
Okay, thank you very much. And then my final question, I thank you for walking through sort of the full spectrum of students receiving special education services and those categories. I'll dig, further into that at another hearing as well. But I did just want to ask, could you just unpack how you determine, because we're all very concerned about the weighted student formula, how do you determine high need? What is your criteria and definition of high need? Counselor Asabi George is doing incredible advocacy on behalf of our homeless students. So I just want to make sure that we're not narrowly defining what is high need, given the complex and varying needs of our student population.
When you refer to the high need, you're talking about the high need of special education or the high risk student weight?
High risk student weight. What is that criteria?
That's based on our early warning indicator system at BPS, the leading lagging indicators report, which is primarily a function of grades, attendance and behavior, and then MCAS profile. We look at students who are entering high school at risk for not graduating on time. And so the risk rating is those students who are at risk of not graduating on time.
And there's a weighted student funding that delivers additional dollars to schools that serve incoming ninth graders who have the at-risk profile.
Okay. In the interest of respecting my colleagues' time, I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. I know I went over a bit.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the idea that we're looking at this from a 30,000-foot perspective. But as a former Boston Public School high school teacher, I certainly have experienced BPS, and as a parent of 4 children in the system, I've experienced this very much so on a ground zero level and perspective. And most of my questions will come from that perspective. And I think that as important as this is, it's also kind of exciting to be that teacher that's asking questions about this billion-dollar budget. This morning I was late for this hearing because I was attending City Mission's conference on homelessness. And as chair of the Homelessness, Mental Health, and Recovery Committee, I have a particular interest, as Councilor Presley said, with our homeless student population. We have, as you know, almost 4,000 kids that attend BPS. That's 7% of our student population that's currently homeless. And when I looked at this budget, and when my staff looked at this budget, we found 2 lines and 1 reference to homelessness as it relates to our kids. And I have significant concerns about that because those are some of our most at-risk students, and they are part of our most at-risk families and families and students that need so much of our care and attention in our schools. And, you know, it extends into talking about nursing. It extends into talking about guidance counselors. It extends across the board. And these students that are at tremendous high risk aren't necessarily entering the 9th grade. They're entering our kindergarten classrooms, they're entering our 1st grade classrooms, and they often don't become homeless during the summertime and enter 1st grade, or whichever grade. It happens during the school year. So I have some, loads and loads of questions about how we're working with and assisting and supporting our homeless students, in particular as it relates to transportation and getting our kids to school. And so I'm going to ask my question about transportation, but I also want to hear about our lack of reference, which really, when we talk about the value statement, we talk about our attention, we're not paying attention to the student population. So talk to me a little bit about McKinney-Vento, talk to me about our transportation costs as it pertains to our homeless kids, and talk to me about our homeless kids. Anyone?
So, Nate, you'll probably get into specifics. Let me first of all agree with you that absolutely this is a population that often is neglected because it's not always so visual. I guess because these students do come to our schools every single day, and we don't put a label on them like you are homeless. We wanted to make sure that the homeless, our Hearn office is strategically placed where it will get attention. So right now, we have it reporting directly to Amalio Nieves, who is our assistant superintendent of social and emotional learning. And we know that there are some concerns around transportation. And so we actually have now assigned someone from our Welcome Center to be completely focused on our homeless transportation. So moving forward, we should have less issues with homeless education. Nate might be able to get into some more details in terms of the budget.
Yeah, in terms of the 2 lines that you referenced, the specific program codes that we have for tracking homeless spending really does relate only to the transportation. We have 2 lines. One is for parent reimbursement. Parents who are transporting their student and they qualify under McKinney-Vento can receive reimbursement for that transportation. They don't need to use district transportation. The bulk of our budget for next year, $320,000 for homeless transportation, is for paying vendors to transport students so they can remain at their home school while they await permanent placement. So currently we have the obligation when they're putting it as an obligation probably is not the right way. This is a valuable service to our homeless students to provide stability for them in their school while they wait permanent placement. And so we provide the transportation if they're placed out of district to continue to receive education in our schools. There's also recent legislation that has either just recently been passed or is under consideration to classify 2 new categories of spending for the district. The first is for students who are in foster care, who are awaiting a permanent foster placement, to categorize those students as homeless under McKinney-Vento so that we can, again, continue to keep them in their home school and have the ownership of transporting them back to their home school while they await placement. And then also to allow students who are placed in permanent housing, who are formerly homeless, receive permanent housing to continue to attend BPS schools through the end of the school year. So they have the stable home environment or stable school environment while they stabilize their home environment. All of these things will add expenses to us as a district. It is an expensive thing to transport our homeless students, but it's one of those that when I was recently notified that we need to begin planning for this, it makes absolute sense for our students and is an important thing for us to be able to do for a vulnerable population. I will just note that this does not capture a lot of our students who would be classified as homeless, but are actually doubled up or who are not formally reporting as homeless or who have unstable living situations. These are just students who are traditionally categorized as homeless.
Well, I think part of my concern here is that we know that this number is growing of homeless students, whether they're actually homeless or they're doubling up and at tremendous risk of becoming homeless. One of my concerns about only seeing this referenced in two lines in one reference, in a reference of the homeless student initiative, which isn't even listed in the budget anywhere, is we're associating value with money, right? But we're not spending the money on this student population. They're getting maybe some assistance from a nurse, a school nurse, which may or may not be full-time. They're getting some assistance from teachers or other adults in the building who may or may not know that they're homeless, because we're not notifying schools and teachers, classroom teachers, when a student becomes homeless and when we as a system know that that student's homeless. So it's incredibly frustrating to me to see that we're not paying particular attention to this group of students.
So, I recognize that. I think one of the things that we need to look at is our student weighted formula, and do we make sure that our students who are homeless they're recognized as part of a student weighted formula, so we can actually make sure that there is the commitment to dollars moving forward for this population of students. So we hear you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to just shift gears quickly, just echo what Councilor Jackson had brought up with the McKinsey audit, that, I can't make a presumption whether that's a thorough audit, whether it's an adequate audit, without seeing that information. And I think as a former classroom teacher in a building that was busting at the seams, that particular high school is still consistently under-enrolled every year and still has more kids than we, have technically seats. Whereas at the beginning of, not last school year, but the school year before, we need to go beg, borrow, and steal chairs so that every kid in our school building actually had a seat to sit in. And it brings me really to the enrollment office. I think so many of our challenges when it comes to the budget, because it's all based on student enrollment, so many of our challenges come from that enrollment office. And as a parent, as someone who has spent a lot of time in parent circles and in teacher circles, there's no predictability, there's no information, there's no transparency when it comes to that particular office. And it's very frustrating because it affects school budgets, it affects student assignment and plans for families for their children going forward, whether, where they see that pathway. And for that office to play such a significant role in how schools receive funding, for them to not be transparent, for us to not know what's happening in that office is incredibly frustrating. And if we're going to fund what Councilor Presley was saying about that pre-K, that strong start, we can't drop these kids off at the end once they hit 9th grade and say, forget you, I hope you get to graduation. Because it's a significant problem and it's a significant issue. I don't know if you've got anything to say about the enrollment office.
Implementing a streamlined, equitable, transparent projection enrollment and assignment system has to be one of our initiatives moving forward.
Well, and we also have to know what's been working and what hasn't been working in the background.
That's right.
Where we currently sit now, we don't know, is it working? What's it look like? Where's the data? Where's the information?
That's right.
And then on extended learning time, I do have a number of questions. I apologize if that beeper goes off, I'm talking right through it. My kids, for full disclosure, I said this yesterday, my children were at a cohort 2 school. They were supposed to go to extended learning time this fall. That's off the table. And that really affects us. Someone who didn't necessarily buy into the idea of ELT, once we decided as a system we were going there, we need to go through with that. And if we're not going to do the proper planning to get there, it's just something that we need to spend more time doing if we're going to go to ELT. So it's frustrating, again, as a parent, as a teacher, now as a city councilor, it's incredibly frustrating that when we buy into future plans that we're not there. And it affects equity across the board. It affects parents' morale on the school system. And we want to strengthen our school system, not water it down and weaken it. And I think that's what some of these programmatic plans do to a system and to a school. ELT, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about it, but excellence for all. Can you explain to me what excellence for all is?
Yes. So, as part of the first 100 days, we took a deep look at access to advanced work class in the system. So advanced work class are seats in the city in some of our schools, 4th through 6th grade. They serve about 10% of our students. And for that 10% of our students, a little less than 10% of our students, they have a more rigorous curriculum and they have access to more enrichment. One of the things we saw, and it was very clear in a lot of reports that were written about AWC, is that those who have access to AWC and those who do not are cut very sharply around racial, linguistic ability lines. And so what we wanted to do was expand rigor and expand enrichment 4th grade, starting at 4th grade next year. We need to stop segregating our kids in the city at 4th grade. And that's what we are doing. So in schools that currently have AWC, we have provided an opportunity for schools to include all 4th graders at those schools. So for example, at the Bates, 4th grade at Bates next year, all students will be included. All 4th grade classrooms will have enrichment. All 4th grade classrooms will have the same rigor. At the Curly, another example of a school that currently has AWC, but they're going to go with this approach. There are 10 schools that don't currently have AWC. They are going to do an excellence for all. Very similar model, more rigor at the 4th grade. We want to make sure that those 4th graders next year will also get enrichment. So over time, the goal is to make sure every single student, every single 4th grade classroom is reflective of the rest of the city, has rigor, has enrichment, and that's the kind of the beginnings of how we make sure there's equity throughout the system.
I suppose I'm a supporter of AWC. I think that it plays an important role in our school system. I think that we should be looking at expanding sort of the traditional view, how AWC has existed over the last however many years. And I'm also a supporter of excellence for all. But when I hear you talk about that, to me, it sounds like I have 3 children in 4th grade right now, that they're not part of a rigorous curriculum, but they are. There's great things happening at their school. It's not an AWC school. So I think that saying we're going to expand excellence for all across all 4th grades implies that it's not happening now. And I'd say that's a problem if we're saying that it doesn't exist right now.
I would say it's inconsistent across the system. But yes, there are schools. I walk schools every week. There are 4th grade classrooms that are not AWC where there's excellent education going on. We want to make sure that's consistent.
Very good. No, I think that that's the message that should be delivered, as opposed to we're going to create this across all 4th grade classrooms. What about the summer program? And this is sort of that micro ground zero question, that there's this 1 or 2 week academic camp in the summer for kids that score at a particular level, I think on the Terra Nova. And it's an opportunity to give kids access to some academic tutoring in preparation for the exam school testing in the fall. And it's used by many families who can't afford or find the opportunity to send their kid to private tutoring.
So you're referring to the exam school initiative, 450 seats.
We used to call it nerd camp in a positive way.
I'll call it the exam school initiative. 450 students currently have this opportunity to get a seat at the end of their 5th grade to prep for the exam school, in preparation for the exam school initiative, for the ISEE exam in 6th grade. Right now, it's a first come, first served basis. And what we see is it's not equitably distributed to all elementary schools within the system. What we need to do, hopefully sooner than later, is provide more opportunities for students to access this prep and make sure it's more equitably distributed throughout the city. That's our goal. And I think there was a Global article this Sunday that came out and spoke about it. I'm very optimistic that.
So is it happening?
Yes, it is.
And when will the promotion of that program go out?
We're doing a lot of planning. Hopefully, optimistic we can announce something very soon.
All right. And then one of my, I've got, I think, 2 more questions. The reinvestment of some of the money that was lost in this special education student-weighted formula, that sort of the shift in some of that money that was sort of captured with the creation or the formula change, is being reinvested, I think, in places that should be considered capital investment as opposed to operational investment. Can you speak to that? I think it's a significant amount of money. It's $3 or $5 million that's going to go into some, I think, capital improvements as opposed to operational.
So I think I would agree with potentially with the data system, but the transition services and the support for inclusive practices, those are just reinvestments of our kind of general functioning dollars. Our data system is so critical because right now, after an IEP meeting, it could be up to a month before a parent actually receives an IEP. And it's very difficult to actually track and pull that data. And so our investment in a better data system that gets the IEP sooner and allows us to start providing services sooner, that was a very critical investment for our long-term care for our kids.
I was going to actually save that question on the IEP process. What's the typical time, but I'll ask it now. What's the typical timeline from whether it's a parent or a teacher or physician identifying a potential or a reason to do an IEP or to do a core evaluation to an evaluation actually existing, an IEP?
Are you talking about like initial IEP?
From initial to the student has been recoded.
Okay, so like when a student needs to be reassessed, so full cycle educational assessment, I can't give you the exact average timeline, but that's not really just the IEP process. That's a whole cycle educational analysis, and it really depends on the child. So I don't have what the average.
I think that it's often too long, I guess, is what
Yes.
I'm suggesting or saying.
And I think that the data system will help shave off some important and valuable weeks at the end of the cycle to help close the loop with the family.
All right, and then my 2 last comments. When you say, Carlton, I'm sorry, when you speak about the potential of mothballing buildings that are being renovated, windows, all sorts of capital improvements, with the exception of educational purposes, that frightens me because I know what that means. That means that if a school closes, we can only reopen it for a different educational use. We've got charter school growth coming, so that makes me really anxious, especially as we tried to shore up what we're doing in BPS and really keep it firm. Just a statement. And then last, I think tied a little bit to what Councilor McCarthy said earlier, it exhausts me when transportation drives education. That's incredibly exhausting and frustrating as a parent, as a teacher, and as a city councilor. That's the end of it. Thank you very much for indulging me.
Councilor Jackson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess just to follow on to what Councilor Sabi George was saying, we actually had an opportunity to meet with over 300 parents as we spoke to them over the course of 10 meetings. A couple things that frustrate me. So one, I just want to go on the record, since you guys didn't have the data, I will give you the data. $158 million will go to charters. $213.9 million you're estimated to get in Chapter 70 funding. My elementary math means that you're going to get $55.62 million from the state. Very soon, you will get 0 Chapter 70 funding. That's a problem. And as she just noted, if you're locked into educational functions, because we dealt with this when we did Hyde Park High School, where you then have to pay back money or not receive dollars to continue to pay for the bond, we're not giving the buildings away to charters. That's untenable. In addition, it frustrates me that, and I'll just say, this is not leadership. Stop saying you're going to close schools before having a plan. That's not leadership. And you know what parents say? We can't negotiate this system. Stop doing that. Wait till you have the plan, you have the money. You took an additional 12 months to even spend the money. But it is not leadership to say, and you know what parents hear? They're going to close my school. When you toss it out as this broad swath as closing schools, that's what they hear. And that's not leadership, and it doesn't allow people to want to put their children in the school system. And by the way, you have a waiting list that's longer than the charter schools. For your highly chosen schools, you have more than 37,000 students who are waiting to get into your highly chosen schools, in addition to families that have their kids in charter schools. So take some pride in the work that y'all are doing. You're doing some good stuff, right? So this concept of closing schools it's not on the table right now, right? In addition, by the way, you have 4,000 kindergartners who are waiting to get into your schools. So what are we saying here? So this last slide, to go back to the themes that are emerging, you don't have closing the achievement gap and closing the opportunity gap as the theme that is emerging. We should look at that lens first and foremost. And to some of the special ed, and Councilor Campbell broke it down, we're actually giving less to the students who need the most. Let's be very real. Autistic students, our trauma students, and what this tells me about your EECs, which nationally renowned, people come in to study what you're doing there. What's happened is that you have a baseline of funding based on the number of people that you need in a building to function, right? We got to figure that out, but that's why that's the case. So I'm not to preach at you guys, but there's to come unprepared to answer our questions around finances is really frustrating to me, and then we toss out to parents when we should be investing that we actually are gonna close schools, but we don't know what schools that we're gonna close. That's not okay. So to get back into the transportation component, so you guys came to us and told us that you were gonna save money by putting 7th and 8th graders on the T. I'm now told that actually cost you money versus saved you money. Can you tell me what the outcome of the transfer of moving 7th and 8th graders on the T? In addition, can we also have a conversation about what that means to school safety? Because in Dudley Station, we are having fights with a couple of hundred young people that are happening in and around our T stations, which may not show up on your radar, but it is an issue.
Yes, in our transportation hearing, I'm sure we'll have folks who'll be better able to answer than I am. I believe we achieved most of the savings that were projected for this year associated with moving children onto the T. We have had some challenges this year meeting our budget for FY16 that were due to things such as a surge in our door-to-door service, changes to start and end times at schools. Remind me, I know there was one other third thing. Sorry, my memory's failing me, but we'll go into some of those at our transportation hearing.
And your changes to start and end times at schools. One of the things that you also do is that you allow charters the more preferential start times, and then BPS students are actually left to deal with, families are left to deal with not as preferential start times. So what is the plan? And with the ELT, that's one of the other aspects, right? So we put it forward. There are schools like the Clapp School that literally changed their governance structure, right? So they could fit into this, and then we didn't do it, right? So it is much more harmful to not do something than to start it and to roll it out. And you actually had someone who wasn't for it. gets there, and then we say, oh, you know what, we can't do that. We don't have the resources to do that. How are we, it's over $1 billion budget, right? So how are we thinking about these plans into the future?
I was just going to respond directly on the charter transportation issue. We're actively looking into that and agree it's something we need to look at. One of the challenges is that our current driver contract dictates the time of, I'm not going to get all the details right, at the end of the time of the day. And there are challenges given the longer school day that our charter schools face, that if we give them later start times, it puts them outside of that window for our current driver's contract. We're working on it, and we agree it's something that deserves further attention.
And it's still the case that even with less students, you actually still have the same payment to the company, correct? So the contract that you have relative to transportation, even though you are transporting less students, aka the 7th and 8th graders,
Yes.
you still have a flat payment to them, so they make the same amount of money. Is that the case?
I believe it's slightly down from the previous year. I would have to go back and check.
There's three portions of the contract primarily. There's the pass-through cost, there's the fixed management fee, and then there's a variable management fee that has performance incentives aligned to it, and they have not received any of the performance incentives. I would also just add that the CLAP will have extended time next year, that the cohort 2 schools were put on hold, but there are 2 schools that we are planning to add in terms of ELT, the Edwards, which had a loss in state funding for their extended learning time, and then the CLAP, which changed their government structure, so we're continuing with the extended time there.
So on the K1 seats, great data that you presented recently, that students of color are actually closing the achievement gap there. Really, really awesome, right? So we were set to have 200 to 300 of those seats. I guess my question is, can you comment on whether or not the mayor's office and BPS favor a hybrid or non-BPS provider partnership? And is the mayor's office committed to 100% BPS only model for K0 seats?
So for the 200 additional seats that we're providing, these are BPS seats that we're committing to.
Okay. And the second part around the K0 being covered by BPS?
The K0 being covered? I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
So there are varying models relative to hybrids working with other non-BPS organizations, non-BPS buildings. So are currently K0 seats are in BPS buildings? Is that?
Yeah, our K0 seats are primarily special education seats within BPS buildings. And so when we identify somebody as needing or is qualifying for having an IEP at 3 years old, then we provide them with a K0 seat.
Okay. And what we've seen is that those young people have done very well, right? And I want to compliment you on the work that's actually happened relative to those offerings. And that is an encouragement to do more and to take more people off of that list. And this is also around how many people go into buildings. There's way more people who are waiting to get into the schools than you have open seats currently in the buildings that we have.
Absolutely.
Right. And to Carlton's, I guess the question around 93,000. We had 93,000 seats in about 1973. That's the last time we had 93,000 seats in the city of Boston. And it's not okay to tell people that you take the square footage of a building and we break it up based on, there's not a warehouse, right? It's based on what the MSBA standards are. That's the best way to actually look at it. And that tells you right now, you guys don't have a lot of space. And if you do, I hope, plan to build some new buildings, you actually need swing space, right? You need spaces for students to go while you build a new building, such as the Dearborn. And you have young people in the Burke currently, and that school is oversubscribed.
Absolutely.
Right. So again, this is the school closure piece. Maybe someday, after we actually have a plan, and we say, hey, some of the smaller schools, like a Nathan Hale or something like that, that's in my district, should be a larger school, and we could actually expand that model. And that just is a different mentality than to say that we're going to close schools, right? And we should look at it from an asset base rather than a deficit base. I guess on the special ed front, how much would special ed have cost if you made no changes year over year? What would the budget have been if you did not reconfigure special education?
It's a slightly difficult question to answer. We've referred to the roughly $5 million reduction in weights to weighted student funding. That's how much money would have been allocated to schools serving students with special needs. So a school receives their allocation in a lump sum and then works with our office to determine how to best serve the needs of the students that they have. And every classroom generates, a full classroom generates more in terms of allocation than is required to serve those students. So if we were to add $5 million through weighted student funding for special education, it's unlikely that we'd see the program budget, which is the $9 million number we referenced, go up to $14 million in a sort of a straight line. Some of the schools that received a cut through the special education weight change made cuts to special education services. Some made cuts in places other than special education through supplements that they were providing to the general school.
So this is interesting because this part of it is somewhat of a affront to the aspect of the close opportunity achievement gap matrix value statements. So those closest to students must be empowered and held accountable for making most critical decisions that lead to student achievement. And I'll just say this to you, it broke my heart when I was at Charleston High and I had someone who is in a classroom with students with multiple handicaps. She didn't know whether or not at that point, she didn't know whether or not she was going to be there or not, but she was brokenhearted based on the class size. So what this budget does is we're not getting the resources to the students that actually need it most. And what we've done is we've moved from whole milk to skim milk to extend the dollars to not necessarily meet those needs. And I'll say this to you, I got approached by a parent who moved their child from Boston to Brookline. So she has an autistic child, 2 full teachers, and 5 paras in that classroom of 10 students. So yeah, they have 10 students, but there's 7 teachers in that space, and our child's doing amazing, right? And so I think we really do have to look at what is actually happening at the classroom level, and what we're saying to autistic students and parents. And those folks who have trauma, and yeah, it's great we got a grant, but it's a $3,000 cut for elementary and middle school students who have trauma. How does that play out in the classroom setting, and how are we aiding those families in dealing with those issues? Where does that come from in terms of being able? And you're cutting the central office, so it can't be shouldered by the central office. Where do those supports come from?
Every student, depending on what their IEP states, is legally entitled to those services. And our job is make sure that the resources allocated so those services are being met. That is our legal requirement to do so, period.
Focus on excellence. So you just regressed to the legal definition of what we should be doing for our young people rather than excellence. So my question is, where's the excellence in that statement and in that budgeting? Because our young people start behind. We have a persistent and real achievement gap. And so I don't understand how that deals with that aspect of it. Like how do we get there?
Yeah. We allocate. I think it just kind of goes back to the bigger picture. We allocate our dollars based on a student-weighted formula. We take our allocation that we're provided, and our responsibility is to use this in the most wisest way. We allocate to our schools in a student-weighted format that does provide more dollars for students with special needs. Our schools then use those dollars in the best way that they so choose. We do allow our schools, because they are the ones closest to kids, to make those decisions, period.
How many FTEs does this budget cut out of the Boston Public Schools?
In terms of budgeted FTEs, sorry, just scrolling to the bottom of the page. Total reduced budgeted FTEs, 102 over current. Projected filled FTEs, we're actually projecting a slight increase.
Can you explain the difference there?
The difference has to do with we budget for positions in our budget. The FTEs represent how many total potential positions could be filled. We know that there's always vacancies or people who are leaving partway through the year. We also don't budget for long-term leave and the suitable professional capacity positions in an FTE manner. The city budget book includes a projected filled FTE because that's a predictor of our total anticipated cost for employees. So we're anticipating a slight increase in terms of filled FTEs for the next year.
Okay. So how does it denote in the autism strand that there's going to be that a para is not going to be 1-to-1, it's going to be 0.5? How is that denoted in there?
Mm-hmm. So if you look on our budget documents, we have a program budget for special education programs. We categorize teachers first as a special education teacher account, and then the program indicates which special education program that they're supporting. We have program codes for autism. We have program codes for inclusion. Under that program budget for special education on all funds, if you'll give me one moment. In terms of autistic programs, we do see a decline of 21 FTEs, mostly in terms of paraprofessionals, and then some in terms of a shift from substantially separate settings to inclusion. So we're seeing a significant increase in FTEs supporting our inclusion program. 190 increased overall.
What is the cut to Madison Park's budget?
The final budget for Madison Park is actually still in progress. The total allocation that you'll see on the allocation documents we've provided do not include a supplement that's been provided to Madison Park in years past and continues to be provided. The decrease in funding that Madison Park will have for this year is primarily driven by the change in enrollment, so a change in their weighted student funding baseline. For Madison Park, in terms of their weighted student funding dollar change, sorry, I just need 1 minute to pull it up. They received a weighted student funding change from $12.5 million to $11.5 million, roughly a $1 million cut in weighted student funding. Some of that will be offset by increase in their the planning for the school improvement grant. Some of it will be offset by a supplement that's still being determined.
So we're again wishing for state money that is not guaranteed to us. Another category that of money and dollars that that's a grant, right?
Yeah. Well,
so our young people have to. We have to wait for the application and those dollars to come back to us, because we realize the change that has to happen there. There's going to be obviously layoffs and things of that sort. But we continue year over year to underfund that school, and we say that it is a valuable school, and we're going to turn it around. But we're not getting there.
The biggest change, I'm sorry, I should have added this. The biggest change in terms of what we see in terms of projected enrollment is in an intentional decrease in the number of special education students and programs being served at Madison Park. So it doesn't directly affect the vocational side or the academic programming. It's really about how we serve special education students and the number of special education students that are served at Madison.
But they're going to get hit harder because of the change in the weighted student funding and the fact that over nearly 70% of the students there are high need students, and many, over 40% of them are special education students. And you've actually changed the weighting for sped students, right?
In terms of percentages, they have currently projected to have 70 substantially separate, or high severity special education students out of a projected enrollment of 874. They do have another 120 students who are resource room students, where there was no change in weights for those students. The two categories of students where there was a weight change, autism and emotional impairment, Madison Park has roughly 20 students there in those categories.
I have several more, but we'll Councilor O'Malley, did you have other questions? I'm going to pass it back to Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you just said something that sort of piqued my interest. You said Madison Park's budget is still in progress. How many other school budgets are still in progress?
There's some always some minor changes that are made at points in the spring where we're adding where after round one assignments are done and we see how many additional classrooms we may need for mostly in kindergarten, we'll make changes. And then the K1 expansion, we were finalizing the new classrooms for K1 expansion. But in terms of overall budgets that are in flux, it's Madison Park, and it's because of the deep work that the headmaster and executive director have done to really think about their programming. As Dr. Chang mentioned, the process has been longer than our traditional schools.
Okay, so that's the only one.
In terms of, the question mark is
okay.
As big.
And again, I'm not trying to throw gotcha questions. I'm just really having a difficult time after 6 years understanding this, because I guess let me get back to one of my earlier questions. So the $7 million that was restored to the high schools, essentially from cuts or recalibrations or whatever you want to use, where did was that money taken from another part of the budget?
Yes. We had $6 million. Sorry, there's a little bit of rounding here, which is why
fair enough. Yeah,
approximately $6 million of previously proposed investments that have been removed from our official budget submission. They are investments that we very much hope and expect to still be able to move forward with, but they have been put on hold.
And this is the ELT, for example.
ELT is actually not one of the items in there.
Okay.
We decided to put that on hold for non-budgetary reasons. Well, transportation logistics, I guess you could call.
Sure.
Budgets. In fact, I have the list here.
Personalized learning and some more innovative teaching and learning models, translation. We wanted to make some investments in English language learner coordinator positions centrally that would be supporting schools. Dollars for our expansion of AWC and Excellence for All.
Gotcha.
Safety office.
Yeah.
And I could clarify something I said in case you'd seen this written down. We did have money for planning for ELT, which is in this list, which is slightly different than the rollout of the ELT, and I might have confused you when I said that.
So the school budget, the original budget cuts, shortfall, whatever you want to say, was $38 $8 million, with 26 coming from central budget reforms and 12 coming from individual school budgets, which included the high schools. The new number, 26 million, remains at central departments, but it's now 5 million to school budgets, with that different 7 million coming from other investments that were put off. Is that correct?
That is correct, with one small clarification. I just want to make sure you use the
Sure.
word deficit. The numbers you refer to are the reductions that we have planned, which cover not only balancing our budget to address rising costs, but also to fund our investments. So I'm not sure I would characterize that as a deficit, but you were accurate in the numbers that reflect the total proposed reductions.
All right. So the reduction was originally 38 million,
Yes.
with $26 million reduction to central budget, 12 million reduction to school budgets, and now it's $5 million reduction to school budgets.
Yes.
And that 5 million school budgets, I assume, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that's where I'm hearing from the parents saying, at the Linden and West Roxbury, we're losing this great innovative dance program. The Curly School, there have been other things. These are this manifests itself in a school principal being told that he or she has less money to work with because of changes in weighted student formula, because of other things, which then they have to craft their budget.
It's a part of it, but individual schools would have different budgets for a variety of reasons from one year to the next. Certainly, that $5 million is a big reason, but an individual school could also see fluctuations in its allocation because of shifts in enrollment.
Sure.
They
No.
might be getting smaller, or as I mentioned before, they're an autonomous school that is budgeting on actual salaries, and they're feeling the pressure of rising salaries. But
Where the Patrick Linden would fall into that because it's a pilot school. Got it. I guess my question is, can further investments be made to further reduce the $5 million reduction in school budgets?
We went through a budgeting process that started in October, and we did look at every potential efficiency in every single central office. The way we were able to restore the high school cut was through investments that we wanted to make. So at this time, we have not identified any sources where we can restore that $5 million.
Okay. Well, I will. It's something that I will further be following up with as the hearings progress. Just briefly, and I believe Councilor Presley asked about it, but obviously it was of tremendous concern reading about additional elevated lead levels in certain waterfronts. So can you guys just briefly, Carlton, Superintendent, whomever, just talk about some of the safeguards you guys are putting in place for our kids?
Okay, so thank you, Counselor. So I'm reading from a memo that was presented to the school committee, so forgive me for reading. So the first thing that we're doing is that we are testing all online schools, and we're increasing our testing protocol to once a year, whereas before we would test less frequently than once a year for lead. Two, we're hiring a mechanical engineer to standardize testing, communications, and manage the water pilot rollout. So we have we anticipate having a new staff member to help us through this effort. Number three, we're creating a district water access strategic plan in conjunction with the facilities master plan. So we're making sure that the two things are knitted together so that as we roll out, we're being mindful of all of our planning efforts. And then four, we're improving our water policies associated with access in all schools, i.e. maintaining water coolers, water jugs, cups, signage, and water stations to promote healthy drinking water habits. In other words, we're making this a whole holistic approach. We've heard comments where we might have water and we didn't have someone to move the water jug. So we're making sure that all of those issues are being taken into consideration.
No, and I know obviously you guys take this incredibly seriously, and I and my colleagues stand ready, willing, and able to help to do whatever you all need to make sure we can fix this issue. So thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna.
Chairman,
and right after you, I'm actually going to call parents. So I'm going to start with Andrea, if she can make her way.
Counselor, I apologize. I'm overdue to my next commitment, but our team will remain here for the rest of the hearing. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up and why the parents coming down. I don't know where he went, but I asked for the weighted formula chart.
Yeah.
In sort of providing that chart to the committee.
Absolutely.
Can you also do the breakdowns of what schools have resource rooms that were cut, or can you break it down by schools, by numbers, not just simply give us a description of the weighted formula?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Andrea? Can you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Hi, my name is Andrea Watson. I am presently looking for housing. I am somebody who has been for many, many, many years through my own life experiences of having a son living with autism on the developmental delay spectrum. I have to say that. I don't know where you are educated from. I don't know where you're from, and I can understand the counselors maybe who are not living with that, but to hear that from an educational community is disgusting. Please, please, living with autism, that's one part of who that human being is. One part. And can I make a suggestion? Some of the wonderful things that you guys have come, I love what you're doing with the homelessness stuff too. Thank you so much. Is to try and look at some of those things with my experience around special education and then going on working within changing the residential. As a matter of fact, the whole state's residential system changed, and it began right here in these chambers. Okay, it was that man's father that helped us get the chambers, and Michael Flaherty, when we turned the whole residential school system over. And then looking at child welfare and all those things, what I learned around with education, whether it's special education or not, if you approach it from a different type of, I don't know how to put it out there. If you look at it differently and you bring in everybody, including the parents and the students, to try and figure out or help be part of what you guys are calling, I don't know what you're calling it, a vision or what you call it, but an actual plan, it would be helpful. It really would be in everything that you're doing. And I would like to first commend, after I left the city to go be near my grandchildren, ended up in Flint, Michigan, of all places. So I have to commend the mayor and the school department, because when I arrived back here with my son full of lead, myself living with lead and copper, and you don't know how hard it is for me to be sitting here right now in front of people, one of them right here that I knew as a child. And Ayanna, I mean, looking the way I do, having done what I've done around education and child welfare and the juvenile justice system within this city and state, okay, I'm going to tell you something right now. I don't care if it's in a water faucet. I don't care if it's in the toilet water. I don't care if it's anything. Even an ounce is too much. I had to learn the hard way. When it comes to the health, welfare, and safety, especially health of human lives, and this is no Flint, Michigan. By any stretch of the imagination, you gave me faith again in government and humanity. I'll tell you that, by being completely transparent. And I'm not going to go a whole lot further on the microphone about what I know and believe in my heart. I know, and I don't need to be a scientist. And I'm not trying to play Erin Brockovich. Matter of fact, I don't want her here. She doesn't need to be here. I understand the fact that these are old buildings. I understand that the infrastructure on the outside is probably as updated one of the in the country, although we'll need upgrading. And I understand the difference. But I also understand what it can do to a human body in attacking the nervous system. Once it touches 1 little ounce of heat, and all it takes is you take, the only way I can describe it is you take a piece of hair and you split it up 18 million times, and you take one of those 18 million pieces and you drop it into hot water and you boil it. And it increases by bazillions and bazillions and bazillions plus infinity. That's all I can say. Again, please continue to be transparent with the community and with the families. I'm happy to help you guys. And I have to, again, the mayor has been wonderful. Counselor, I'll call him Tito, because I don't know what else to call you anymore. It's just stuck in my brain since here. Ayanna and the new council members, and Matt, I'm sorry, I didn't even recognize you. This is what it does, okay? It creates what seems like Alzheimer's. My son lost all of his upper teeth. It can create behavioral and neurological problems and start a pathway to a juvenile justice system that's just completely unnecessary. So let's work together, and I'm happy to be part of the solution. But I'm very, very, very well educated on lead, very well educated. And it can show up at a certain level in one place and another level in another. And guess what's only ultimate? Which I'm sure is your goal. Zero. Zero exposure. Which means you've got some work to do. And I know you have my phone number as well as your press person. And you guys do as well too. So I wish you luck. And if
Thank
any
you, Andrea.
parents need any support around this, I'm happy to help them.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Lisa, then Kenny, then Tanya.
Lisa grabbed me before she left.
Oh,
She had to
okay.
go pick up her child from school.
Okay. Kenny Jervis. And then on deck, we have Tanya Tedesco.
Good afternoon. Once again, we're here at another budget meeting, the beginning of this process, the second part of a process, one that first started in school committee, and we watched school committee basically hold their nose and swallow a budget that was basically inswallowable. And they probably went home and puked like us parents did when we had to accept that that was what was given to us. Once again, we hear the budget people talk about structural deficit and the large burden put upon us that they have to fund, yet we still see nothing to move us in the future to fix that. We hear about this 10-year facility plan. In 10 years, I'll be here asking you not to raise my senior citizens' tax rate on my houses, not about my children's school building. We don't have 10 years, as you can tell by the recent findings this week of lead. We talk about, I sit here and listen to you talk about, overcapacity, yet you don't know that number. I come from the restaurant world. We have a certain amount of seats that we have to fill every night. And when we have our weekly meetings, we know those numbers. We know every Thursday at weekly managers meeting what those numbers have to be. Yet I've heard you guys for 3 years not know those numbers. That is disgusting and irresponsible. And I don't know how you guys maintain your jobs not knowing the basic financial numbers you need to fill those seats. I don't get it. Well, it's mind-boggling. And to hear not of how to fill those seats, but how to get rid of them. I couldn't imagine a restaurant person or any business talking about getting rid of space and letting their competitors know that they're struggling. That does not make sense in any conscionable sense of fiscal management. Yet you guys do that week after week here. It makes zero sense. We talk about the structure, yet it's very simple. We don't need data. We need eyes wide open to look at the fact that our neighborhoods are filled with buildings that were built in the 1800s. It is 2016. We have schools that fit 150 to 200 people, yet we have neighborhoods that have thousands more kids. And we also, because we have a roll of the dice enrollment system, we send these kids on buses all over the place and play this game of where's Waldo on your child's education. We need to strategically build new buildings. I can use my neighborhood for an example. We have 6 schools, elementary schools, that all fit about 150 to 200 kids. build a brand-new 2020 state-of-the-art school and combine those 6 schools into that school and have proper principals, proper nutritionists, proper nurses, proper guidance, proper supports, and let's move this instead of having zero vision and continuing to run your system into bankruptcy. It's called vision. It's called entrepreneurship. It's called moving forward, not just filling dirt from one hole to the next. So someone around here in this city, in the new bowling, nice bowling building, beautiful new bowling building for you guys to all put your bums in, while our kids sit in buildings that have closer lineage to the names on the front of them than to them, including the George Washington School. Think forward and improve our buildings so the money isn't spent on new windows, structural deficit that we can actually spend on supports that support our children, support their education, and help them move forward in their dreams and the dreams that we all have for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. Ms. Tedesco, if you could introduce yourself for the record. And then we have one more after. You might as well come down. Mary Battenfeld, right after.
Hi, my name is Tanya Tedesco. I'm a resident of West Roxbury, and my daughter is a 9th grade student at Boston Arts Academy. I came with prepared notes, but after sitting through this, I'm sort of going to touch on them. Some of it is a reiteration of what I said at the school council, the school committee meeting before they voted. I've spent the last 10 years homeschooling my kids, and my daughter opted to attend Boston Arts Academy. And the reason I've been speaking out and coming to all of this is when I've been talking to people that I'm friends with in West Roxbury and in the suburbs, they continue to tell me that what I'm telling them about the school system couldn't possibly be the case. And if it is, in terms of the water fountains that don't work, which at her school is apparently a step up from the lead problems, at least they've cut off the source of that, they've said to me, well, why don't you just move? And to me, that is the wrong answer. It shouldn't be that we are setting up a system that people that have the means can opt out into a situation that is better for their kids and leave all the families behind that do not have the option. I've spoken to several counselors. All the counselors here know me except for Counselor Chioma. I haven't met you yet. I would like to encourage everyone here to, and I've been heartened by some of the questions that the counselors have asked, to reframe what urban education is. It is far more than just academics. It really is an extension of all of the social services that this city is offering, failing to offer, can't offer, whatever. The school is it's the last stop. And we have a chance in Boston to really make this the premier urban school system in the country, and not in terms of test scores. My homeschooling background, I am not a fan of testing. I'm not a fan of standardized education. But I do recognize that in the context of educating 56,000 kids, there needs to be some standardization. But we have a chance to really make the schools a vibrant, exciting place where all the kids are supported, instead of just saying, well, all the kids, and I live in West Roxbury, I can say this, kids in West Roxbury that don't get into one of the good schools, which I sort of feel is a euphemism for poor kids and lots of kids of color, they don't get into one of the good schools, they can opt out. That is just, we shouldn't just be abdicating the school system. So I would really like for us to think about it in a broader sense, and a lot of the questions you guys have been asking really made me feel very happy in terms of nurses not being at schools, just to start rethinking it in terms of it as an outreach of all the social services that the city offers. And I do think that the mayor needs to give a little bit of an explanation as to why the budget is what it is. I've heard the 35%. That's not much compared to the rest of the state. That's all.
Thank you very much. Mary Battenfeld.
Good afternoon, and thank you for staying so long and for holding this hearing and providing all the information. Again, my name is Mary Battenfeld. I'm a longtime Boston Public School parent. I was one of the parents who last night received a call that my child's school has elevated, the water fountains had elevated lead levels in 3 of the fountains. And I know this will be for a larger discussion, and I can't top the previous testimony on the impact of lead. But I do want to say that I think the policies that are being followed are leading us in the same direction as Flint, Michigan. When you put structural efficiency, when you cut cost, when that is your guiding light rather than what is best for children, children will be hurt. Again, I don't know all what happened in terms of the testing of the water fountains here, but I suspect that, yes, we did the legal minimum of tests, which is maybe 1 fountain or 2 fountains, not all the fountains. That's what you're planning to do for special ed and autism strength. Children will be hurt if you do that. All 3 of my children attended Young Achievers, amazing school. That school, however, has gone from what they used to refer to as a high-flying school, high poverty, high kids of color, level 1 school, to, is it now, I don't know whether it's level 3 or level 4 now, but that's because we have cut the funding for Young Achievers. When my daughter was in kindergarten back in 2000 or whenever, she had a classmate who could not speak, he could not feed himself. He was from an immigrant family. He had not been diagnosed with autism. Young Achievers made that diagnosis, gave him the supports they need. There was another child at Young Achievers, I remember, who was failing. He was falling asleep in class. Again, another school might have blamed the parents, said, you're not giving him enough sleep. We had a nurse who said, let's look at what's happening with him. Turns out the child had sleep apnea. That was why he was falling asleep at night. He had surgery. He's in college now. And when the superintendent was talking about having to look at data points, data is important, although it depends on what data you're looking at. Not the data of the McKinsey report, the McKinsey, which has been called the grim reaper of downsizing, McKinsey, which led to closed schools in Philadelphia and a mess in Detroit. You don't want to be looking at that. Look at other figures. For example, BPS numbers of English language learners has increased from about 10,000 5 years ago to 16,228 this year. That costs more money. So instead of going with the line that, oh, we are not efficient enough, we need to cut, we need to look for more efficiencies, we need to say we have a needy student population. Our homeless students are increasing. Our English language learning students are increasing. Our students with autism are increasing. We need to serve those students. The mayor's increase is even more stingy than our stingy governors. It's 1.3%. Middle of the Depression, when we were losing, when the population of Boston Public Schools was going down because kids couldn't stay in high school anymore because they were helping their families, we increased the budget. In 1893, sorry, I'm a historian. In 1893, in the middle of a depression, the Boston Public Schools budget increased 36%. We can do it. And in a way, in a sense, I think I'm talking, preaching to the choir here. I think you all know that, or many of you know that. But I think what we all need to do, and I hope what we do, is not accept this budget, but that we come together and tell the mayor, we need more money. This is not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, can I make a closing statement? So I think Mary really did drive it home. I think we are starting with a budget that is absolutely unacceptable. This is a compliance, it's been described by you guys as a compliance budget. And it meets the quote-unquote legal requirements. I think that's debatable. And I do call on the administration and the mayor's office to increase funding for the 75% of school-age students who are 100% of the future of the city of Boston. We miss every single year when we don't bring in K0 and K1 students who are waiting to get in to our schools. And they fall behind in that time. And I think we need to stop comparing ourselves to other states and look at ourselves in the context which we're in. We're right next to Cambridge, and they spend $8,000 per pupil more than we do. And you know what? They're proud of it. They're very, very proud of the work that they're doing. And they're not talking about closing schools. Our students are largely poor. They have many challenges that other school systems that we compare ourselves to don't have, but they're making the investments. We are at one of the best economic times in the city of Boston, in the history of the city of Boston. And we should be investing and not having conversations about one-time spending. There is an investment here that we have to definitely step forward and make. And again, you guys are working with what you got. That is very real. That you are working with a budget that you were given. And when we speak about issues of revenue, the Chapter 70 money is your revenue, and you got a couple other things that come along with it. But most of the revenue that we're talking about is a decision on the other side of the building. And so I call on them to actually listen to what parents are saying, listen to the 3,650 students who are informed about their education, who understand what's going to happen in their schools, who are going to high schools that won't have librarians next year and could potentially lose their accreditation. And actually, sadly, who are now going to schools, we're identifying that young people have been ingesting water that is above the limits around lead. This is Boston. We should lead and not follow other places. We have to do right by our young people. And Mr. Chair, I look forward to digging into this, but we start with a budget that is unacceptable to take care of, in particular, the most needy students, autistic students, the students who have trauma, and that inherently means that we're not even taking care of our general education students. And we should look at our schools and our students as an asset and not a deficit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. That concludes this hearing for now, and we'll see you very shortly. Thank you. This hearing's adjourned. It is Tuesday, April 25th. I'd like to introduce my colleague who has joined me, Anissa Sabi-George, Counselor at Large. I'd like to remind folks that this hearing is being recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8 and RCN Channel 82. I ask anybody in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation and questions by counselors, we'll take public testimony and would appreciate it if you would sign up at the sign-in sheet by the door. Please state your name and affiliation and residence, and limit your comments to just a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns are heard. I'd also like to remind folks that we've implemented a new way for the public to give testimony through Google Hangouts. You can go on cityofboston.gov to find out the details, or call my office, 617-635-3113, to see how you can sign up for future hearings. We are here regarding dockets 0551 through 0554. And before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilor Matt O'Malley as well as Councilor Andrea Campbell. Docket 0551, message in order authorizing the Boston Public Schools to reestablish in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half, a revolving fund to accept from the fund up to a maximum of $1,800,000 to fund fiscal year 2017 to support the maintenance and repair of Boston Public School facilities, including custodial and utility costs for extended building time, floor refinishing, landscaping, and building repairs. Docket 0552, message and order authorizing the Boston Public Schools to reestablish in accordance with General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half, a revolving fund for fiscal year 2017 to accept from the fund up to a maximum of $1,500,000 to repair and purchase Boston Public School technology, including computers, mobile devices, and instructional software. Docket 0553, message and order authorizing the Boston Public Schools to reestablish in accordance with General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half, a revolving fund to accept from the fund up to a maximum of $125,000 to fund fiscal year 2017 Boston Public School transportation costs, including bus and public transportation costs. Docket 0554, message and order authorizing the Boston Public Schools to reestablish in accordance with General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half, a revolving fund to accept from the fund up to a maximum of $400,000 to fund fiscal year 2017 to perform energy-saving maintenance and equipment upgrades in school buildings. I'd like to welcome Nate Cooter, Budget Director for Boston Public Schools. These are reestablishment of existing revolving funds, and backup data is available to counselors on request. And with that, I'd like to also acknowledge that we've been joined by Counselor Sal LaMartina. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Cooter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As the chairperson mentioned, we're asking for the reauthorization of 4 revolving fund accounts, which is consistent with the number of revolving accounts we had for FY16. I'll go through each one briefly and explain, and then take questions that you have around our revolving accounts. The first, for docket 0551, is account 10196K, our revolving fund for facilities permit and leases. The purpose of this is for us to be able to collect fees from outside organizations and people who are using our facilities to cover our custodial costs, overtime costs for use of the building, and or use that to reinvest in some of the maintenance for those buildings. The second account is managed by our technology department, our BPS technology revolving account 10196M, the authorization amount of $1.5 million. This is for the maintenance related to our Laptops for Learner program, our program which provides a laptop for each of our educators. It is funded through the sale of our previous fleet of laptops and through fees if there's been damage to a laptop and needs to be repaired for something like an accidental drop or a spill. It's paid for through those receipts. The third account is a transportation revolving fund that is managed by our transportation department, account 10196J, associated with docket 0553. This is the purpose of this revolving fund is for bus and transportation costs for field trips. So when a school community signs up for a field trip and needs transportation, they're paid for through this account. The expenditures in this account are for external providers, external contracts to provide that transportation. And the final revolving fund account is our energy revolving fund 10196N for docket 0554. This is our mechanism for collecting rebates from our utility companies in conjunction with our city departments to be able to do energy upgrades on our facilities and to capture some of the rebate opportunities that the state provides. At this point, I will take questions related to our revolving account.
Oh, great. Could you, some of them are probably self-explanatory, but could you go through each revolving fund and give an example of the revenue, how the revenue is realized, and what some of the expenditures are as examples?
Sure. For the maintenance and repairs revolving fund, the facilities, the first one, each time external partner rents our space, they may come and decide to use one of our buildings, the Irving School. I know in Rosendale has a number of organizations use it on the weekend. They're charged a permitting fee for use of that building, and it's related to the overtime cost of cleaning the building and any other incidental charges. So the expenditures that we would then use for that account include refinishing some of our gym floors. We've used it for paying the overtime costs associated with keeping our custodians there to keep the building open or to open the building on the weekend. The second account for technology, the money is used for paying for repairs on those laptops when damage occurs. So if there's a damage to a laptop screen and we need to replace that screen, or damage to a hard drive and need to replace that hard drive, we'll then expend the money from this account. The source of the revenue comes from the sale of laptops, or from there is a fee that's charged to employees who are responsible for the accidental damage of that equipment. The transportation, the expenditures for the transportation account are on vendors providing the transportation. So if we need to call in a transportation contractor to be able to pay for a field trip, or if we're paying one of our existing bus drivers for that field trip, the expenditures are then charged against this account. The fees that are charged are typically $350 for a single trip, for a field trip, for a single bus, and so they'll be charged to the school communities. The source of the schools may do private fundraising, or may charge fees in order to pay for that field trip. So the deposits that you'll see are in small dollar amounts, typically of checks from those schools, or in bundled deposits. And then the final account, the energy, there were no expenditures in FY15 from this account, but the expenditures that we would expect to see in this account are related to upgrading of energy efficiency. This is where I should have tapped Carlton to be more specific in terms of an upgrade to a boiler, or upgrading to some of our energy systems in the buildings. And then whenever we do those upgrades and they qualify for a rebate, we then submit those expenditures for a rebate, and then populates future investments in energy upgrades.
Great. Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nate. I know it's been a long day, and I assure you this will be a lot more expeditious hearing. Obviously, makes sense, support the reauthorization of these, it's important. Quick question about 0551. I know several schools used to, I don't know if they still do, rent out parking spaces in their parking lots for Red Sox games. The McKinley, maybe Latin School, some of the downtown ones. Do they still do that? And is that reflected in some of these revolving funds?
Yes, I'd have to get back at the list of schools. I know, for instance, the McKinley School, the renting the parking spots for Red Sox games, we do collect the parking fees through this revolving fund. And then depending on, we do have in the case of the McKinley, revenue sharing agreement.
And that makes perfect sense. I'd obviously, that if we've got these great locations and the schools do it, it seems to make a great sort of outside the box revenue stream. So I'm glad to hear it. 0552. So that's every BPS teacher is given a MacBook, correct? When he or she starts.
Correct.
And then if there's damage that they caused by them, they would pay the difference, or to get it replaced, or to get it fixed, and that's what this fund's all about.
I believe it's a flat fee for damage to be repaired. And then there's also, you'll notice in the details, a number of large deposits. That came from when we did our last laptop refresh. We found the vendor, I believe, is out of California, who paid $1 million for our old laptops. We then sold them off, and that is the largest source of funding for this.
Great. And then 0553, that's pretty self-explanatory. A revolving fund set up to get the buses, and then kids, might have to kick in a couple dollars per student or whatever to keep it flush. And then the energy mechanisms. Do you know if any Boston Public Schools have solar PV paneling on their roofs?
I actually don't know the answer to that question, but I can find out.
I'll follow up with Joe LaRusso as well. He was here yesterday for a similar hearing, and I know that they're looking to add about 20 new City of Boston buildings, so I would assume and would hope schools would be in there. Other than just back to 0551, so what other events are done in schools? Do people ever rent out schools for weddings? I ask that because I'm in the midst of it myself, and I know people not only do the Copley Library, but other libraries have been done, and I'm curious if any schools have ever been rented out for a wedding. City Hall was, if you can believe that, last year.
I don't know if a school building has been rented out for a wedding. I can certainly look into it.
Yeah, really, just out of more curiosity. And then are there other?
Is there a particular library or auditorium you're looking at?
I am all set, but I'll be doing it. I'll be doing it outside. But no, believe me, I thought could be a way to. We have some beautiful old buildings. Admittedly, many need a lot of work, but I'm just curious. And then, are there any other schools that maybe particularly in Councilor LaMartina's district that would rent out parking spaces just on the weekends, near restaurants, South End, North End, sort of Back Bay area?
I know there's been a lot of interest in looking at our parking spaces and figure out what revenue opportunities there are from those parking. Recently, there was a change to the parking policy for during non-school hours. I think a lot of the concerns, the primary concerns that I've heard about doing this more has to do with overall liability for the city, and then also for the schools in the morning when somebody doesn't move their vehicle, or if there's snow overnight, working around the cars to be able to get the parking lots cleared for the school. I know there's some logistical concerns around it, but
definitely, I mean, it's fraught with peril. On the other hand, it does seem to be a nice sort of tidy way to generate a little bit more revenue that could then help these schools that are able to offer the service. So, thank you, Nate. Thank you for your good work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilor Tito Jackson. Chair recognizes Councilor Anissa Savi-George.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for being back here this afternoon. I've got a few quick questions. On the facilities fund, we're pretty close to our maximum, although it seems to go out as quickly as it comes in. So could you just explain that just a little bit more on the facilities fund?
In terms of the total maximum revenue that we've received?
Well, the maximum authorization is 1.8. We get pretty close to it, which is fine, but we take in and give out. I guess I don't understand if that's a special accounting term or the in and the out.
Yeah, I think in terms of we want to be in a place where we're using all of the funds that come in, because it's an opportunity for us to use those fees to provide necessary maintenance on our buildings. And as you know, from our other discussions, facilities maintenance is something that has been cut in the past, and we have done a lot of work to restore what we refer to as deferred maintenance as much as possible. So when we do have fees, I know in a conversation with our head of facilities in preparation for this, we talked about the need to do refinishing on our gym floors, something that it's a space that we want to rent out, we want to make available to the community, but it's something that you see the wear and tear in terms of the shape of the gym floor. So we will look at the revolving fund in the next year to use that to rehab some of refinish our hardwood floors using our custodial staff.
So it's just a quick in and out. I mean, I get, and it's a revolving fund, so it should be.
Mhm.
So thank you. On the transportation fund, there's a huge difference between last year's spending or intake and outtake. What's the difference between last year and this year? Last fiscal year and this fiscal year?
In terms of expenditures, I can say that the part of it has to do with the time of year and when we would anticipate receipts and how we process them. So I don't, the other piece of it is how much people can afford and are spending on field trips that require transportation. So I think I'd have to get into it a little bit more, but this could be a reflection on how much schools are spending on field trips that require transportation, not necessarily all overall field trips, but.
And then last on the energy fund, just we've got nothing going on there. Is that a fund that's going to continue?
We wanted to continue as the mechanism by which we can collect rebates. I will need to check with the facilities team in terms of the planned rebate eligible investments that could populate an additional intake. In terms of expenditures through this year, I'll need to get back to you on in terms of what the planned expenditures are. It could be that we don't have current year eligible expenses.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up on the school energy. So here, this is fiscal year 15. There's a total receipts of a little over $30,000, but there's no expenditures. So what happens to those funds at the end of the fiscal year? I know you have to seek annual authorization for each revolving fund, but what happens?
Yeah, one of the additional flexibilities that we get from a revolving fund, in addition to being able to collect money, is that the revolving funds roll over from year to year. So there's not, in our operating budget, it's sort of a use it or lose it proposition. But in these funds, they would continue to roll over so we can not be bound by the fiscal year in terms of making smart use of that money. So that's why you'll see a department will hold on if they don't have the correct,
So if you receive $30,000 in the prior fiscal year, that should still be the balance for the next fiscal year.
Yes,
correct?
that will be yes, that will continue. So the balance of this fund with no expenditures is $30,000.
So only reason I was confused is because total receipts and expenditures are $0 below that.
That's anticipated new receipts, or excuse me, that's total new receipts for the first half of this fiscal year.
Okay.
So that would add to the balance.
Got it.
Yep.
Perfect. That explains a lot. I just had two quick follow-up questions. The laptop fund, so docket 0552, do you ever donate the old laptops? So I know you talked about the company that bought some of the old ones when you guys were refurbishing or doing new laptops. The only reason the question is asked is I ran into an organization that does some incredible work related to domestic violence in the community. They've been around for 30 years, maybe even longer than that. And they're trying desperately to find someone or organization or someone to donate computers for the people who participate in their program. So in looking at this, I was just curious if you guys ever donate laptops.
Part of the service that's provided when we sell the laptops, we also, each of these laptops, as you can imagine, being used by teachers, have a lot of student data on them. So we go through the process of the firm that purchases them is also recycling them, meaning stripping them of all data, making sure that they're clean, and so that when they go to a new owner, they're not going to all of a sudden have, say, my son's report card on it. And that, so donating would require us to actually spend money to get the laptops cleaned and then donate them to a third party. The other thing is that we use this fund to then help us purchase the next round of laptops and make other necessary investments in our technology infrastructure as a district. So while I love the idea of supporting other organizations, I think given our need to continuously invest in technology as a district, that's kind of our.
It was just a question. I mean, it's if you guys have ever done the sort of donate idea, I'd be curious to know, and under what circumstances, if that ever happened.
Yeah, I'll reach out to our technology department and find out.
Thank you. And then one last question. This technology fund is only for teacher administrative laptops, not related to students and laptops that students receive.
Correct.
Is that how are student laptops and technology funded? Is there another revolving fund, or is that operating?
There's not a revolving fund. We have, we take advantage of the city's lease purchase program to expand our student laptops. We've done it a couple different ways. The biggest push right now is for additional Chromebooks. We don't tend to use the sale option on those because we tend to use them past their life.
That makes
span
sense.
Of those laptops.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for being here all day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor LaMartina?
Thank you. Hey, thank you. Interesting. I did not know that we could charge for parking fee. Because the Elliott School in the North End, which is close to the garden, 30 spots, $30 a night, that's $900 a night that we could make. So I don't know who we could talk to. It could be, maybe we could put it out to bid. That's some big money that we could use in the schools in the North End or citywide. But I'm sure Ms. Trace would love to be able to put someone out there. So if we could look at that, just give me someone I could talk to, whoever's in charge of the parking fees, I would love to do that. And then just a question in regards to the transportation fund. Is that $125,000 for the sports teams also, or just the field trips? Or do you know what the budget is for the sports teams?
We do budget for student transportation for athletics within our operating budget. But I know.
So this is just for field trips?
On the details of this, it does say transportation travel for athletics. So I can find out if this is an accounting piece, because the conversations that I've had, all of these fees are in line with the field trip amounts. And so I think this is just perhaps an account.
So I did hear you say that it costs $350 a bus for a trip?
I believe that's the fee for a single trip for transportation.
So if we have 125,000 and 114 schools, then every school should have a transportation budget for field trips, because I can tell you, I'm getting hit up for donations all the time for field trips.
A couple things on that. The first is that this revolving fund will also collect fees for our charter schools when they do early dismissal days. So it's not necessarily just a field trip. It could be anytime we have, there's a menu of services that schools and charter schools can purchase from our transportation: early dismissal, field trips, and then late buses. The fees could be collected depending on how the school intends to pay for it. So schools will also budget for field trips on their operating budget, in which case we just do a budget transfer to the transportation department. But if it's through one of their BEDF accounts, they may cut a check into the revolving fund. So there's a couple different ways that we manage the overall field trips and then the other items.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Jackson, you're all set? Is everybody all set? Great. Thanks, Nate. That concludes this revolving fund hearing. This hearing is adjourned.